The arrival of the tarnished Link at the precipice of the Great Plateau introduces the first narrative pillar of the Wild Era, defined by the lore of the archaeology of the Amnesiac. This is not a kingdom of living men, but a mausoleum of open air, where the very grass grows over the bones of a technological apocalypse. The lore suggests that Hyrule reached a zenith of mechanical divinity 10,000 years ago, creating a sovereignty of the machine that was eventually buried by the fear of the divine. When Link wakes from the Shrine of Resurrection, he is a tabula rasa, a blank slate representing the loss of the cultural soul. The plateau acts as a microcosm of the fall, a walled-off purgatory where the hero must rediscover the basic laws of physics before he can address the broken laws of the king. This is the lore of the Naked Rebirth, where the hero starts with nothing but a Sheikah slate, a relic of the digital god, to prove he can survive a world that has forgotten his name. The presence of the old man on the plateau provides the lore of the ghost of the failed state. This figure is the spectral remnant of King Rome Bosphoremos Hyrule, the last ruler to see the sun set on a functional kingdom. His lore is rooted in the regret of the father. He represents the failed guard of the Calamity. The king's spirit is tethered to the plateau, unable to move into the light of the Triforce until he finds a vessel for his unfinished vengeance. This introduces the lore of the spectral handover. He does not offer Link a crown, but a paraglider, a tool of descent and flight. This represents the demotion of the hero. You are no longer a knight of the realm. You are a scavenger of the ruins. This highlights the existential weight of the plateau. It is the high ground of history, from which Link must fall into the wild to understand the scale of the ruin he was unable to prevent a century ago. The lore of the Sheikah slate introduces the concept of the technocratic magic. This device is the external soul of the hero, containing the runes of the ancient science. It represents the replacement of faith with calculation. In the Wild Era, Link does not pray to the goddesses for fire or ice. He downloads the Cryones and Magnesis modules from the travel gates. This is the lore of the Digital Covenant. It suggests that the Sheikah tribe sought to program the miracle. This represents the hubris of the Eye. By relying on the slate, the ancient kingdom attempted to automate the defense of the world, turning the Master Sword's destiny into a user manual. This highlights the tragedy of the automated guard. The very tools meant to save the kingdom became the infection points for the Calamity, proving that power without spirit is a gateway for the dark. The Guardians of the Plateau, the Decayed Stalkers, introduce the lore of the cannibalized protector. These are spider tanks of the goddess, now rusted and possessed by the malice of Ganon. Their lore is defined by the betrayal of the metal. They were designed to protect the Hylian bloodline, yet they are the primary reason the bloodline is nearly extinct. This represents the irony of the shield. To fight a guardian is to fight the kingdom's own strength turned against itself. This highlights the mechanical horror of the wild. The beeping of the eye is the sound of the apocalypse, a binary scream that signals the death of the natural. Link's encounter with these broken machines is a confrontation with the past's failure, proving that the old world's defense is now the new world's greatest threat, turning the Great Plateau into a junkyard of divine intent. The lore of the four shrines, Oman-O, Jabage, Kh Namit, and Ablafa, provides the lore of the modular initiation. These are not temples of worship, but tutorials of the soul. The lore suggests that the monks of the Sheikah have sat in deep meditation for 10,000 years to provide one final lesson to the hero. This is the lore of the mummified wisdom. It represents the stagnation of the holy. The monks are dry husks of faith, proving that the ancient order has exhausted itself to wait for Link. This highlights the transactional nature of the spirit. You offer labor in the shrine, and the monk offers a spirit orb, a fragment of his own dissolving soul. This turns the quest for power into a harvesting of the ancestors, where the hero grows stronger as the ancient world finally fades into dust. The Great Plateau Tower introduces the lore of the resurrection of the grid. When Link activates the first tower, he is remapping the memory of the Earth. This is the lore of the topographical awakening. It suggests that the geography of Hyrule has been erased from the mind by the calamity. This represents the blindness of the survivor. Without the tower's signal, the world is a nameless void. This highlights the control of information. By scanning the land, Link is reclaiming the sovereignty of the eye. This turns the wilderness back into a map, proving that lordship is the ability to name the mountain, a digital conquest that allows the scavenger to visualize the kingdom he is destined to inherit, even if it is only a landscape of scars. The bokoblins of the Forest of Spirits provide the lore of the primitive successors. These are not soldiers of an army, but scavengers of the meat. Their lore suggests that after the calamity, the monsters became the new citizens of Hyrule. This is the lore of the de-evolution of the enemy. They represent the wild state of the malice. They live in skull camps and tree hollows, using club and bone instead of steel and magic. This highlights the regression of the conflict. The war for the Triforce has turned into a struggle for the stake. Link's battle with the bokoblins is a Darwinian dispute, a fight for the top of the food chain, proving that in the Wild Era, the lordship is not declared by a crown, but proved by the spit and the fire of the survivalist camp. For the Link of the Great Plateau, the world is the testing of the senses. You realize that the world is large and indifferent. The lore suggests that Link is the stranger in his own home. You are the only echo of the palace, left in a forest of the beast. The Sheikah slate is not a tool. It is a window into a dead god that you must use to relearn the language of the stones. This perspective is what makes the Breath of the Wild so poetic. You are climbing the ruin to see the sky. You look at your scope, knowing that it is the only vision of the king that the plateau understands. The Golden Age is a memory of the wind, and you are the only ear left to listen to the silence. As this first segment of the history concludes, Link stands atop the Temple of Time, the ghost of the king fading into the morning light. Before him lies the vast kingdom of Hyrule and the road to Kakariko Village. The journey from the Great Plateau to Kakariko Village introduces the lore of the migration of the scattered, representing the physical and spiritual path through the dueling peaks. This geographic landmark is more than a mountain split in two. It is a monument to the violence of the calamity. The lore suggests that the peaks were carved by the very force of the goddess Hylia to create a passage for the refugees of the Great War. For Link, passing through this gate is the lore of the re-entry into the social contract. After the isolation of the plateau, the discovery of the stables and the traveling merchants provides the first evidence of the resilient economy of the ruin. This is the lore of the microsovereignty of the road, where the kingdom is no longer a centralized state but a series of safe nodes connected by the bravery of the horse and the stamina of the wanderer, proving that the spirit of Hyrule survived even if its architecture did not. The arrival in Kakariko Village provides the lore of the hidden continuity of the Sheikah. Unlike the ruins of central Hyrule, Kakariko is a sanctuary that looks toward the past while existing in the present. This is the lore of the architects of the secret. The village is tucked away in the mountains to protect the last practitioners of the ancient wisdom. This represents the preservation of the blueprint. The Sheikah here have discarded the mechanical pride that led to the Guardians and returned to a traditionalist philosophy. This highlights the penitence of the tribe. They serve as the chroniclers of the failure, waiting for the return of the night to pass on the information that the stones have forgotten. Link's presence in the village is the lore of the restoration of the archive, where his digital slate is finally recognized by those who understand its primal code. The encounter with Impa introduces the lore of the human clock of the calamity. At over a century old, Impa is the only living bridge between the world that was and the world that is. Her lore is defined by the burden of the long wait. She is the guardian of the prophecy, the one who remembers the link of the sword before he became the link of the shrine. This represents the biological memory of the kingdom. While the king is a ghost of the mind, Impa is the blood of the history. Her role is to narrate the guilt of the past. This introduces the lore of the mandate of the divine beasts. She reveals that the only way to defeat Ganon is to reclaim the four mechanical titans, Vah Ruta, Va Rudania, Va Meadow, and Va Naboris. This highlights the symmetry of the redemption. The machines that cause the fall must be the machines that facilitate the rise, turning the quest for the Titan into a reclamation of the kingdom's lost limbs. The lore of the captured memories provides the emotional foundation for the hero's identity. Impa explains that the Sheikah slate contains photos taken by Princess Zelda 100 years ago, representing the visual diary of a dying world. This is the lore of the haunting of the landscape. By visiting these locations, Link is not just exploring space. He is colliding with time. This represents the shattered ego of the hero. Each memory recovered is a fracture of the past rejoining the present. This highlights the tragedy of the protector. Link discovers that he was not just a soldier, but a point of friction in Zelda's own struggle with her powers. This turns the wilderness into a psychological minefield, where every beautiful view is a trigger for the trauma of the day the world ended, proving that sovereignty is a burden of remembering as much as it is a burden of the blade. The lore of the Great Fairy Fountains and the presence of Kat-Era near Kakariko introduce the lore of the starving divinities. These are the ancient mothers of the land, yet in the Wild Era, they have lost their power because they no longer receive offerings of the rupee. This is the lore of the economic nature of the holy. It suggests that the goddesses are tied to the prosperity of the people. This represents the drought of the divine. Without a functioning kingdom, the magic of the earth has retreated into bulbs of stone. This highlights the transactional grace of the wild. Link must buy back the miracle, proving that sovereignty requires a financial investment in the spiritual health of the landscape. This turns the great fairies into mercenaries of the soul, where the hero must fund the restoration to receive the armor of the gods. The Yiga clan and the lore of the shadow of the Sheikah introduce the first human threat. These are defectors who have turned their backs on the goddess to serve the Calamity. Their lore is rooted in the resentment of the forgotten. When the ancient king banned the Sheikah technology, the tribe split. This represents the civil war of the secret. The Yiga are the vengeance of the machine. They hunt Link not for gold, but for ideological purity. This highlights the paranoia of the wilderness. Anyone you meet on the road, a traveler, a merchant, a child, could be a masked assassin. This turns the social interaction into a game of lethal deception, proving that the darkness of Ganon is not just a cloud over the castle, but a rot in the human heart that has persisted for a century. The Hat-Eno Ancient Tech Lab and the presence of Pura introduce the lore of the scientific regression. Pura, a genius trapped in the body of a child, represents the obsession of the eye. Her lore is the lore of the longevity of the intellect. While Impa preserved the story, Pura preserved the code. This represents the digital persistence of the spirit. Her lab is a fortress of the scientific method in a world of monsters and magic. This highlights the technological purgatory of Hyrule. The ancient blue flame must be carried by hand to power the furnaces, proving that progress is a manual labor in the post-apocalypse. Link's work with Pura is the lore of the upgrading of the soul, where the Sheikah slate is polished to reveal the hidden sensors of the world, turning the scavenger into a detection grid of the divine. For the Link of the Kakariko era, the world is the testing of the memory. You realize that the world has a name and a face. The lore suggests that Link is the walking corpse of the Order. You are a ghost inhabiting a vessel of scars. Impa is not just a guide. She is the mirror of the failure that you must look into to see the man you used to be. This perspective is what makes the journey to the East so numbing. You are buying your history from mummies and children. You look at your slate, knowing that it is the only heart that the history understands. The Golden Age is a picture in a frame, and you are the only eye left to develop the film of the final day. As this second segment of the history concludes, Link leaves the Hat-Eno lab, the blue flame flickering in the distance behind him. Before him lies the Zora's domain and the road to the Water Titan. The air is no longer fresh with the mountain, but heavy with the coming rain. You have seen the migration of the scattered, the human clock of the Impa, and the visual diary of the memories. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from survivalist reality to the duty of the restoration. You realize that the four champions are screaming in the metal. You look at the Zora armor in your hands, knowing that you will need its scales to swim into the grief of the Mipha's grace. The Golden Age is a sound of water on the stone, and you are the only body left to dive into the flood. The journey into Lanayru and the ascent to Zora's domain introduces the lore of the eternal mourning of the tides. This region is defined by a persistent, unnatural rain that prevents the hero from climbing the cliffs, representing the stagnation of the Zora spirit. The lore suggests that the rain is a physical manifestation of the grief of the water titan, Vah-Ruta, which has been crying for a century. For Link, this journey is the lore of the resistance of the natural order. Unlike the dry ruins of the plateau, Lanayru is a vertical obstacle course where the water itself has become a barrier. This is the lore of the geographic sorrow, where the environment is locked in a cycle of perpetual flooding that threatens to break the dams of the Old Kingdom. It proves that the calamity is not just a destructive force, but an emotional virus that has infected the very climate of the Zora people. The arrival at Zora's domain provides the lore of the architecture of the immortal. While the Hylian structures have crumbled into dust, the Zora city, carved from luminous stone and shaped like a leaping fish, remains structurally perfect. This is the lore of the durability of the deep. It suggests that the Zora lineage, with their long lifespans, are the living witnesses of the hero's failure. This represents the social hostility of the long-lived. To the Zora elders, Link is not a resurrected savior, but the knight who survived while their princess died. This highlights the generational conflict of the ruin. Link must face the stinging words of the council, proving that his sovereignty must be earned through apology and action, rather than ancient decree. Link's presence in the domain is the lore of the rekindling of the alliance, where he must swim against the current of resentment to reach the heart of the throne room. The encounter with Prince Sidon introduces the lore of the unrelenting optimism of the new blood. Sidon, the younger brother of the fallen champion Mypha, represents the energy of the post-calamity generation. His lore is defined by the refusal to sink. He is the catalyst of the hero's return, the only one who looks at Link with hope instead of hate. This represents the infectious nature of the true king. Sidon's constant encouragement and flashy poses are the psychological shield against the gloom of the rain. This introduces the lore of the partnership of the land and sea. He does not lead Link from the front. He supports him from the waves. This highlights the collaborative nature of the Wild Era. The hero is no longer a lone wolf, but a member of a multi-species pact, turning the infiltration of the Titan into a symbiotic struggle between the Hylian soul and the Zora body. The lore of the Zora armor and the memory of champion Mypha provides the emotional tragedy of the Water Titan. The armor, handcrafted by Mypha for Link, is the lore of the marriage of the scales. In Zora culture, crafting armor for a Hylian is a proposal of the heart. This represents the unrequited love of the protector. Link discovers that Mypha did not just fight for Hyrule. She fought for the future she hoped to share with him. This highlights the cruelty of the timeline. By wearing the armor, Link is inhabiting the grief of his dead fiancée. This turns the physical stat boost into a spiritual weight. The memory at the Veiled Falls reveals Mypha's gentle strength and her secret vow to heal Link no matter the cost, proving that sovereignty is a sacrifice of the heart as much as it is a sacrifice of the blood. The lore of the divine beast Vah-Ruta introduces the concept of the haunted machine. This elephantine titan was designed to be the guardian of the reservoir, but it has been corrupted by the water blight Ganon. This is the lore of the submerged malice. It suggests that the advanced technology of the Sheikah is porous to the dark. This represents the drowning of the divine intent. Inside the beast, the spiritual echo of Mypha still lingers, trapped in the gears of the machine. This highlights the technological purgatory of the champions. Mypha is not dead in the traditional sense. She is digitally imprisoned. Link's task is the lore of the exorcism of the Titan, where he must hack the divine logic to release the soul from the shell, proving that power is a ghost in the wire that can only be set free by the master of the slate. The battle with Waterblight Ganon introduces the lore of the mimicry of the murderer. This phantom is a reconstruction of the force that killed Mypha a century ago. Its lore is rooted in the trauma of the spear. It uses a cryonic projection to turn the arena into a floating trap, mimicking the very element that the Zora should control. This represents the irony of the elemental fall. To defeat the blight is to avenge the champion's death, using the ancient arrows and the strategic mind. This highlights the climatic justice of the wild. By shattering the ice of the blight, Link is breaking the fever of the domain. This turns the mechanical combat into a healing of the history, proving that the darkness of Ganon is a stain that can only be washed away by the blood of the vengeful knight and the voice of the lost princess. The acquisition of Mipha's grace introduces the lore of the infinite healing. When Mipha's spirit is finally freed, she grants Link her ability to defy death. This is the lore of the maternal protection from beyond. It suggests that the bond of the champions is a resource that can be manifested in the present. This represents the spiritual battery of the hero. Link is no longer solo. He is carrying the miracles of the dead. This highlights the nostalgic empowerment of Hyrule. The red aura that surrounds Link when he falls is the ghostly hug of the woman who loved him, proving that true grace is a memory of kindness that refuses to let the hero die. Link's exit from the domain is the lore of the resolution of the flood, where the rain finally stops, revealing the first clear sky the Zora have seen in 100 years. For the Link of the Lanayru era, the world is the testing of the heart's depth. You realize that the world is full of people you failed. The lore suggests that Link is the drought after the flood. You are the consequence that the Zora must live with. Mipha is not just a power-up. She is the sorrow of the unspoken that you must carry in your armor for the rest of the journey. This perspective is what makes the restoration of Ruta so bittersweet. You are saving the city but losing the girl all over again. You look at your trident, knowing that it is the only voice that the water understands. The Golden Age is a ripple in the pool, and you are the only stone left to sink into the truth of the champion's sacrifice. As this third segment of the history concludes, Link leaves the Zora's domain, the light-scale trident strapped to his back. Before him lies the Death Mountain and the road to the Fire Titan. The air is no longer heavy with the rain, but dry with the scent of ash. You have seen the eternal mourning of the tides, the human clock of the Sidon, and the sacrifice of the Mipha. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the duty of the restoration to the forging of the will. You realize that the flame of the Gorons is screaming in the magma. You look at the Flamebreaker armor in your hands, knowing that you will need its iron to walk into the heat of the Derek's protection. The Golden Age is a spark in the dark, and you are the only coal left to burn for the king. The journey into Eldin and the arrival at Goron City introduces the lore of the industrial indifference of the earth. This region is defined by a searing heat that sets the very air on fire, representing the inflexible strength of the Goron soul. The lore suggests that the volcanic activity of Death Mountain is a physical manifestation of the rage of the Fire Titan, Varudania, which has been stomping across the crater for a century. For Link, this journey is the lore of the smelting of the mortal form. Unlike the soft rain of Lanayru, Eldin is a vertical furnace where the atmosphere itself is a lethal weapon. This is the lore of the geographic aggression, where the landscape is locked in a cycle of lava flow and ashfall that has buried the ancient roads. It proves that the calamity is a thermal corruption that has turned the source of the kingdoms or into a forbidden zone for anything made of flesh and wood. The arrival at Goron City provides the lore of the architecture of the magma. While the Hylian stone has cracked, the Goron structures, carved directly into the basalt and cooled by massive fans, remain fundamentally unchanged. This is the lore of the persistence of the stone. It suggests that the Goron tribe, with their rocky hides, are the stoic survivors of the apocalypse. This represents the physical immunity of the hardened. To the Gorons, Link is a little guy who represents the fragility of the surface dwellers. This highlights the materialistic philosophy of the mountain. Link must prove his hardness by consuming fireproof elixirs and donning the Flamebreaker armor, demonstrating that his sovereignty is built on adaptation and resilience. Link's presence in the city is the lore of the reopening of the mines, where he must drill through the crust of fear to reach the heart of the boss's office. The encounter with Yunobo introduces the lore of the anxiety of the inheritor. Yunobo, the descendant of the fallen champion Derek, represents the insecurity of the post-Calamity lineage. His lore is defined by the burden of the protection. He possesses Derek's protection, a magical shield, yet he lacks the confidence of the boulder. This represents the fragmented nature of the ancestral gift. Yunobo's stuttering and fear are the psychological cracks caused by the weight of the legend. This introduces the lore of the partnership of the shield and the sword. He does not fight Ganon with a blade, he becomes the cannonball. This highlights the ballistic nature of the Wild Era. The hero is no longer a dueling master, but a strategic operator of the living artillery, turning the assault on the Titan into a calculated demolition of the possessed machine. The lore of the Goron heroes and the memory of champion Derek provides the boisterous tragedy of the Fire Titan. Derek, the jovial giant of the mountains, is the lore of the unbreakable brotherhood. His relationship with Link was not one of rank, but of kinship. This represents the solidarity of the front line. Link discovers that Derek did not just protect Hyrule. He protected the knight he saw as a brother. This highlights the strength of the shared meal. By standing on the peak, Link is inhabiting the laughter of a dead friend. This turns the physical shield ability into a spiritual anchor. The memory on the Bridge of Eldin reveals Derek's fearless spirit and his abrupt realization of the Calamity's return, proving that sovereignty is a protection of the weak as much as it is a defense of the territory. The lore of the divine beast Vah Rudania introduces the concept of the crawling furnace. This salamander-like titan was designed to be the sentinel of the peak, but it has been corrupted by the fireblight Ganon. This is the lore of the incinerated divine intent. It suggests that the advanced technology of the Sheikah is combustible to the malice. This represents the darkness of the mechanical core. Inside the beast, the spiritual echo of Derek still lingers, trapped in the heat sinks of the machine. This highlights the claustrophobic purgatory of the champions. Derek is not resting. He is holding the wall against an infinite fire. Link's task is the lore of the venting of the Titan, where he must navigate the pitch-black interior to release the soul from the shell, proving that power is a flame in the dark that can only be controlled by the master of the slate. The battle with Fireblight Ganon introduces the lore of the mimicry of the burning death. This phantom is a reconstruction of the heat that killed Derek a century ago. Its lore is rooted in the trauma of the explosion. It uses a plasma shield and magma bombs to turn the crater into a pressure cooker, mimicking the very volcanic force that the Gorons should command. This represents the irony of the elemental fall. To defeat the Blight is to slay the smelter using the power of the bomb and the timing of the blade. This highlights the explosive justice of the wild. By shattering the shield of the Blight, Link is extinguishing the fever of the peak. This turns the mechanical combat into a quenching of the history, proving that the darkness of Ganon is a slag that can only be removed by the steel of the vengeful knight and the will of the mountain. The acquisition of Derek's protection introduces the lore of the infinite shield. When Derek's spirit is finally freed, he grants Link his ability to deflect the apocalypse. This is the lore of the Guardian's embrace from beyond. It suggests that the will of the brother is a force field that can be manifested in the present. This represents the kinetic battery of the hero. Link is no longer vulnerable. He is carrying the iron of the dead. This highlights the defensive empowerment of Hyrule. The amber glow that surrounds Link when he is struck is the ghostly brace of the giant who called him Little Guy, proving that true grace is a wall of love that refuses to let the hero break. Link's exit from the mountain is the lore of the cooling of the peak, where the Titan finally sits still, overlooking the kingdom it was built to guard. For the Link of the Eldin era, the world is the testing of the will's temper. You realize that the world is hard and hot. The lore suggests that Link is the quench in the forge. You are the cooling water that the Gorons must respect. Derek is not just a power-up. He is the brotherhood of the lost that you must carry in your bone for the rest of the journey. This perspective is what makes the restoration of Rudania so rugged. You are saving the tribe but losing the brother all over again. You look at your boulder breaker, knowing that it is the only tool that the stone understands. The Golden Age is a spark in the forge, and you are the only anvil left to shape the truth of the champion's vow. As this fourth segment of the history concludes, Link leaves Goron City, the boulder breaker resting on his shoulder. Before him lies the Tabantha frontier and the road to the Sky Titan. The air is no longer dry with the scent of ash, but thin and cold with the wind. You have seen the industrial indifference of the earth, the human clock of the Yunobo, and the protection of the Derek. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the forging of the will to the mastery of the horizon. You realize that the song of the Rito is screaming in the clouds. You look at the snowquill armor in your hands, knowing that you will need its feathers to fly into the storm of the Revali's gale. The Golden Age is a whistle in the air, and you are the only wing left to soar for the king. The journey into the Tabantha frontier and the arrival at Rito Village introduces the lore of the vertical sovereignty of the Gale. This region is defined by a freezing, high-altitude wind that circles the great rock spire of the village, representing the sharpened pride of the Rito soul. The lore suggests that the atmospheric turbulence is a physical manifestation of the aggression of the Sky Titan, Va Meadow, which has been circling the peaks like a bird of prey for a century. For Link, this journey is the lore of the navigation of the void. Unlike the heavy heat of Eldin, Tabantha is a landscape of negative space and thin air, where the danger is not what you touch, but the distance you fall. This is the lore of the geographic isolation, where the bridges are broken and the only way forward is up. It proves that the calamity is a kinetic corruption that has turned the freedom of the sky into a no-fly zone for the kingdom. The arrival at Rito Village provides the lore of the architecture of the perch. While the Hylian cities were built on the soil, the Rito Village is spiraled around a natural column, suspended over the Lake Tadori. This is the lore of the resilience of the wing. It suggests that the Rito tribe, with their ability to take flight, are the detached observers of the apocalypse. This represents the aesthetic immunity of the elevated. To the Rito, Link is a flightless ground dweller who represents the gravity of the surface failures. This highlights the high-minded philosophy of the frontier. Link must prove his aeronautical worth by utilizing the paraglider and the snowquill armor, demonstrating that his sovereignty is built on mastery of the current. Link's presence in the village is the lore of the retuning of the song, where he must ascend the spire of doubt to reach the heart of the Elder's Roost. The encounter with Taba introduces the lore of the fierce independence of the warrior. Taba, the modern ace of the Rito, represents the militaristic discipline of the post-calamity defense. His lore is defined by the burden of the skill. He possesses the aerial archery techniques of the old world, yet he acts with the rashness of the insurgent. This represents the individualistic nature of the modern Rito. Taba's stoicism and scars are the physical evidence of the struggle against Medoa's cannons. This introduces the lore of the partnership of the bow and the slate. He does not wait for a prophecy. He acts in the moment. This highlights the dynamic nature of the Wild Era. The hero is no longer a knight in formation, but a member of a special operations duo, turning the infiltration of the Titan into a high-stakes dogfight against the automated eye. The lore of the Rito bows and the memory of champion Revali provides the competitive tragedy of the Sky Titan. Revali, the greatest archer in history, is the lore of the arrogance of the self-made. His relationship with Link was not one of camaraderie, but of rivalry. This represents the friction of the gifted. Link discovers that Revali did not just despise his silence. He envied the destiny of the sword-bearer. This highlights the bitterness of the second best. By standing on the flight range, Link is inhabiting the ghost of a genius. This turns the physical flight ability into a spiritual challenge. The memory reveals Revali's desperate need for validation and his mastery of the Gale, proving that sovereignty is a performance of excellence as much as it is a title of the blood. The lore of the divine beast Va Meadow introduces the concept of the hovering fortress. This bird-like titan was designed to be the ruler of the heavens, but it has been corrupted by the wind-blight Ganon. This is the lore of the subjugated horizon. It suggests that the advanced technology of the Sheikah is fragile to the malice of the void. This represents the silence of the mechanical heights. Inside the beast, the spiritual echo of Revali still lingers, trapped in the ailerons of the machine. This highlights the frustrated purgatory of the champions. Revali is not resting. He is screaming at the wind he can no longer control. Link's task is the lore of the recentering of the Titan, where he must solve the puzzles of the tilting wings to release the soul from the shell, proving that power is a wing in the void that can only be guided by the master of the slate. The battle with Windblight Ganon introduces the lore of the mimicry of the snipe. This phantom is a reconstruction of the speed that killed Revali a century ago. Its lore is rooted in the trauma of the invisible shot. It uses teleporting cannons and tornado vortexes to turn the sky into a lethal playground, mimicking the very aerial superiority that the Rito should claim. This represents the irony of the aerodynamic fall. To defeat the Blight is to outshoot the marksman using the focus of the slowed time and the arc of the bomb arrow. This highlights the precision justice of the wild. By shattering the eye of the Blight, Link is clearing the skies of the frontier. This turns the mechanical combat into a stillness of the horizon, proving that the darkness of Ganon is a cloud that can only be pierced by the arrow of the vengeful knight. The acquisition of Revali's Gale introduces the lore of the infinite ascent. When Revali's spirit is finally freed, he grants Link his ability to command the updraft. This is the lore of the mocking gift from beyond. It suggests that the will of the rival is a lift that can be manifested in the present. This represents the pneumatic battery of the hero. Link is no longer bound to the earth. He is carrying the ambition of the dead. This highlights the aspiring empowerment of Hyrule. The green whirlwind that surrounds Link when he leaps is the ghostly push of the archer who called him asinine, proving that true grace is a force of elevation that refuses to let the hero be grounded. Link's exit from the sky is the lore of the landing of the Titan, where the machine finally perches, overlooking the frontier it was built to rule. For the Link of the Rito era, the world is the testing of the perspective. You realize that the world is small from the top. The lore suggests that Link is the anchor in the sky. You are the still point that the Rito must orbit. Revali is not just a power-up. He is the loneliness of the superior that you must carry in your heart for the rest of the journey. This perspective is what makes the restoration of Meadow so cold. You are saving the village but losing the rival all over again. You look at your great eagle bow, knowing that it is the only voice that the wind understands. The golden age is a whistle in the gale, and you are the only feather left to ride the truth of the champion's flight. As this fifth segment of the history concludes, Link leaves Rito Village, the great eagle bow strapped to his back. Before him lies the Gerudo Desert and the road to the Desert Titan. The air is no longer thin and cold, but heavy and burning with the sand. You have seen the vertical sovereignty of the Gale, the human clock of the Tuba, and the ambition of the Revali. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the mastery of the horizon to the trial of the desert. You realize that the thunder of the Gerudo is screaming in the lightning. You look at the Gerudo veil in your hands, knowing that you will need its silk to walk into the storm of the Urbosa's fury. The Golden Age is a mirage in the heat, and you are the only cactus left to hold the truth for the king. The journey into the Gerudo Desert and the arrival at Gerudo Town introduces the lore of the scorched sovereignty of the sands. This region is defined by a punishing heat during the day and a lethal cold at night, representing the hardened duality of the Gerudo soul. The lore suggests that the massive sandstorms are a physical manifestation of the wrath of the Desert Titan, Va Naboris, which has been summoning lightning across the dunes for a century. For Link, this journey is the lore of the survival of the extreme. Unlike the verticality of Tabantha, the desert is a landscape of infinite flatness and lethal mirages, where the danger is the exhaustion of the spirit. This is the lore of the geographic exclusion, where the entrance to the capital is barred by an ancient law of gender. It proves that the calamity is a static corruption that has turned the cradle of the Gerudo into a no-man's land for the kingdom. The arrival at Gerudo Town provides the lore of the architecture of the mirage. While the Hylian stones have eroded, the Gerudo capital, built around a desert oasis and fortified with thick sandstone walls, remains a vibrant, voe-free sanctuary. This is the lore of the resilience of the matriarchy. It suggests that the Gerudo tribe, with their strict social laws and warrior training, are the pragmatic survivors of the wastes. This represents the cultural immunity of the isolated. To the Gerudo, Link is a voe man who represents the intrusion of the external failure. This highlights the feminine philosophy of the oasis. Link must prove his respect for the law by donning the Gerudo veil and silk, demonstrating that his sovereignty is built on humility and infiltration. Link's presence in the town is the lore of the unmasking of the hero, where he must cross the threshold of the forbidden to reach the throne of the young chief. The encounter with Riju introduces the lore of the weight of the ancestral crown. Riju, the child chief of the Gerudo, represents the precocity of the post-Calamity leadership. Her lore is defined by the burden of the Thunder Helm. She possesses the inherited authority of the desert, yet she struggles with the size of the responsibility. This represents the fragility of the sovereign bloodline. Riju's doubt and determination are the psychological pillars of the town's defense. This introduces the lore of the partnership of the queen and the knight. She does not demand a miracle. She offers a strategic alliance. This highlights the diplomatic nature of the Wild Era. The hero is no longer a lone agent, but a protector of the young monarch, turning the infiltration of the Titan into a Sandseal cavalry charge against the thunder of the machine. The lore of the 7 heroines and the memory of champion Urbosa provides the maternal tragedy of the Desert Titan. Urbosa, the lightning wielder and mother figure to Princess Zelda, is the lore of the protective fury. Her relationship with Link was one of vigilant observation. This represents the guardian of the royal line. Link discovers that Urbosa did not just fight for Hyrule. She fought for the daughter she saw in Zelda. This highlights the strength of the matrilineal bond. By standing in the Gerudo Palace, Link is inhabiting the grace of a goddess. This turns the physical lightning ability into a spiritual legacy. The memory on the palace balcony reveals Urbosa's stern love and her distrust of Ganon's origins, proving that sovereignty is a vigilance of the spirit as much as it is a defense of the sand. The lore of the divine beast Va Naboris introduces the concept of the walking thundercloud. This camel-like titan was designed to be the guardian of the dunes, but it has been corrupted by the Thunderblight Ganon. This is the lore of the electrified divine intent. It suggests that the advanced technology of the Sheikah is conductive to the malice. This represents the voltage of the mechanical core. Inside the beast, the spiritual echo of Urbosa still lingers, trapped in the capacitors of the machine. This highlights the static purgatory of the champions. Urbosa is not resting. She is snapping at the spark. She can no longer ground. Link's task is the lore of the grounding of the Titan, where he must align the conductive circuits to release the soul from the shell, proving that power is a strike in the dark that can only be channeled by the master of the slate. The battle with Thunderblight Ganon introduces the lore of the mimicry of the instant kill. This phantom is a reconstruction of the speed that killed Urbosa a century ago. Its lore is rooted in the trauma of the lightning strike. It uses high-speed kinetic bursts and magnetic pillars to turn the arena into an electric cage, mimicking the very speed and power that the Gerudo should master. This represents the irony of the conductive fall. To defeat the blight is to reflect the bolt, using the iron of the pillar and the reflex of the blade. This highlights the shocking justice of the wild. By shattering the shield of the blight, Link is dispelling the storm of the desert. This turns the mechanical combat into a calming of the atmosphere, proving that the darkness of Ganon is a static that can only be grounding by the steel of the vengeful knight. The acquisition of Urbosa's fury introduces the lore of the infinite strike. When Urbosa's spirit is finally freed, she grants Link her ability to summon the storm. This is the lore of the divine snap from beyond. It suggests that the will of the mother is a weapon that can be manifested in the present. This represents the electrical battery of the hero. Link is no longer limited. He is carrying the wrath of the dead. This highlights the shocking empowerment of Hyrule. The yellow spark that surrounds Link when he snaps his fingers is the ghostly echo of the woman who called him Zelda's knight. proving that true grace is a force of destruction that refuses to let the enemy stand. Link's exit from the desert is the lore of the stillness of the sand, where the Titan finally kneels, overlooking the Gerudo oasis it was built to guard. For the Link of the Gerudo era, the world is the testing of the identity. You realize that the world is complex and hidden. The lore suggests that Link is the Vo in the Vi's world. You are the outsider that the Gerudo must accept. Urbosa is not just a power-up. She is the wisdom of the Elder that you must carry in your thunder for the rest of the journey. This perspective is what makes the restoration of Naboris so heavy. You are saving the town but losing the mother all over again. You look at your scimitar of the Seven, knowing that it is the only voice that the sand understands. The Golden Age is a flash in the storm, and you are the only rod left to ground the truth of the champion's fury. As the sixth segment of the history concludes, Link leaves Gerudo Town, the Daybreaker shield strapped to his arm. Before him lies the Lost Woods and the road to the Master Sword. The air is no longer heavy and burning, but thick and ancient with the mist. You have seen the scorched sovereignty of the sands, the human clock of the Raju, and the wrath of the Urbosa. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the trial of the desert to the reclamation of the soul. You realize that the spirit of the forest is waiting in the fog. You look at the mark on your slate, knowing that you will need its light to find the blade of the master of the hero. The Golden Age is a rust on the steel, and you are the only scabbard left to hold the king. The journey into the great Hyrule forest and the crossing of the Lost Woods introduces the lore of the fog of the ancient trial. This region is defined by a sentient mist that consumes those who lack the purity of direction, representing the protective isolation of the sacred. The lore suggests that the forest is a living entity that remembers the hero, even when the hero has forgotten himself. For Link, this journey is the lore of the filtering of the worthy. Unlike the open death of the desert, the woods are a psychological maze, where the danger is the loss of the internal compass. This is the lore of the geographic sanctuary, where the path is revealed only by the embers of the torch and the whisper of the wind. It proves that the Calamity is a superficial rot that was unable to penetrate the deep, organic magic of the Korok seed and the great Deku tree. The arrival at the Korok forest provides the lore of the hidden heart of the kingdom. While the stone cities of men were burned, the forest floor, glowing with luminous mushrooms and populated by the playful Koroks, remains a vibrant pocket of the Golden Age. This is the lore of the resilience of the child spirit. It suggests that the forest children are the caretakers of the unseen. This represents the organic immunity of the wild. To the Koroks, Link is Mr. Hero, a figure of playful expectation. This highlights the animistic philosophy of the woods. Link must prove his lightness of heart by navigating the trials of the forest, demonstrating that his sovereignty is built on harmony with the smallest life. Link's presence in the glade is the lore of the return of the gardener, where he must wake the sleeping history at the foot of the great Deku tree. The encounter with the great Deku tree introduces the lore of the silent witness of the eras. As the oldest living thing in Hyrule, the Deku tree represents the botanical patience of the goddess. His lore is defined by the observation of the cycle. He is the keeper of the blade, the one who watched Princess Zelda place the sword that seals the darkness into its pedestal a century ago. This represents the rooted memory of the land. While the king's ghost is a vapor of regret, the tree is a mass of living record. His role is to judge the vitality of the hero. This introduces the lore of the trial of the heart. He reveals that the sword will not be claimed by force, but earned by the strength of the life force. This highlights the biological requirement of the hero. The Master Sword is a vampire of the spirit, requiring the hero to prove he has enough hearts to survive the drawing of the steel. The lore of the Master Sword provides the structural foundation for the hero's return to power. The blade is not just a weapon. It is the mechanical soul of the goddess. This is the lore of the sword of the resurrected knight. It suggests that the blade was resting and healing its own metallic fatigue for 100 years. This represents the shared exhaustion of the pair. Link discovers that the sword is a reflecting surface. When it glows blue, it is recognizing the malice of Ganon. This highlights the symbiotic nature of the legend. The sword is weak when the hero is uncertain, and invincible when the hero is resolved. This turns the physical retrieval into a spiritual calibration, where the master of the blade must realign his pulse with the vibration of the holy steel, proving that sovereignty is a frequency of the spirit as much as it is a grip of the hand. The lore of the hero's sword trial introduces the concept of the purification of the vessel. This is the lore of the tempering of the soul. It suggests that the master sword is a test of the essence. In the trial of the sword, Link is stripped of his armor and gear, forced to survive in a vacuum of the divine. This represents the naked truth of the warrior. To awaken the blade, Link must prove that he is a hero without the tools. This highlights the internal alchemy of the woods. The forest monks provide a digital purgatory, where the hero must relearn the value of the stick and the stone. This turns the power-up into a philosophical stripping, where the lordship is refined until the hero and the blade are one single unit of destructive light. The memory of the Master Sword's placement provides the transition toward the final confrontation. Link recovers the memory of Zelda, battered and exhausted, bringing the injured blade back to the forest after Link's fall at Fort Hat Eno. The lore of the sword sleep is the lore of the final trust of the princess. It suggests that the Master Sword is the only thing Zelda could save. This represents the desperation of the last stand. Link realizes that the sword was his hospital bed, just as much as the Shrine of Resurrection was. This highlights the reciprocal protection of the heroes. Zelda saved the sword to save Link, and Link must take the sword to save Zelda. This is the final emotional closing of the circle, where the weapon becomes a relic of the vow, proving that true grace is a promise that survives the century. For the Link of the Forest era, the world is the testing of the life force. You realize that the world is waiting for its king. The lore suggests that Link is the scabbard of the holy. You are the only vessel capable of carrying the weight of the goddess's wrath. The Master Sword is not a blade. It is a voice of the end that you must hear with your very blood. This perspective is what makes the drawing of the sword so tense. You are pulling your life out of the stone. You look at the glow of the steel, knowing that it is the only light that the calamity fears. The golden age is a ring of the metal, and you are the only ear left to listen to the sharpness of the hero's return. As the seventh segment of the history concludes, Link leaves the Korok forest, the Master Sword glowing on his back. Before him lies the Hyrule castle and the road to the final calamity. The air is no longer thick with the mist, but cold with the presence of the evil. You have seen the fog of the ancient trial, the silent witness of the tree, and the reclamation of the soul. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the reclamation of the soul to the siege of the center. You realize that the spirit of the king is fading at the gate. You look at the castle in the distance, knowing that you will need the blade to cut the darkness of the Calamity Ganon. The Golden Age is a clash of the steel, and you are the only knight left to strike for the throne. The infiltration of Hyrule Castle introduces the lore of the rot within the gilded cage. This massive structure is no longer a seat of government, but a necropolis of stone and malice, representing the sovereignty of the infected. The lore suggests that the castle was designed to be the ultimate bastion of Hylian power, yet its very technological complexity allowed Ganon to turn it into a mechanical trap. For Link, this entry is the lore of the return to the crime scene. Unlike the natural wild of the provinces, the castle is an architectural nightmare where the hallways are flooded with purple ooze, and the air is thick with the screams of the ancient guard. This is the lore of the domestic apocalypse, where the hero must navigate the dining hall and the library not as a guest, but as an exterminator of the past. It proves that the calamity is a parasite of the civilization, feeding on the symbols of the crown to sustain its own eldritch geometry. The exploration of the castle dungeons and docks provides the lore of the subterranean shame of the monarchy. While the upper spires represent the glory of the sun, the basements reveal the secrets of the dungeon. This is the lore of the hidden price of the order. It suggests that the royal family kept ancient evils and political prisoners beneath the beauty of the court. This represents the moral decay of the old world. Link's discovery of the Hylian shield within the Stalnox's chamber is the lore of the retrieval of the Forgotten Vow. The shield is not just armor. It is the unbreakable standard of the knight. This highlights the durability of the true allegiance. By reclaiming the shield, Link is armoring his spirit with the invincibility of the ancient vow, proving that sovereignty is a protection of the innocent that persists even when the king is a ghost and the castle is a grave. The discovery of Zelda's study and bedroom introduces the lore of the loneliness of the scholar princess. These rooms, preserved in a state of dusty arrest, represent the intellectual despair of the last days. Zelda's lore is defined by the failure of the divine frequency. She spent her final nights here, surrounded by mechanical parts and botany books, trying to solve the god problem with human logic. This represents the tragedy of the silent goddess. Her room is a laboratory of frustration, proving that the Triforce of Wisdom was blocked by the anxiety of the expectation. This highlights the human cost of the legend. Link's presence in her private sanctum is the lore of the Witness of the Grief, where he reads the diary of the distant girl, turning the princess of the tapestry into a human of the flesh, proving that the calamity was not just a war of nations, but a murder of the youth. The lore of the king's study provides the political tragedy of the Rome Bosphoremous Hyrule. Behind a hidden bookcase, Link finds the king's final thoughts, revealing the regret of the rigid father. This is the lore of the belated apology. It suggests that the king realized his strictness with Zelda was a symptom of his own fear. This represents the shattered ego of the patriarch. The king died before he could tell his daughter that he was proud of her scholar's heart. This highlights the stagnation of the royal blood. The crown was a blindfold that prevented the king from seeing the power of the love right in front of him. This turns the castle infiltration into a post-mortem reconciliation, where the knight acts as the middleman of the ghostly forgiveness, proving that true grace is a word of kindness that was spoken too late to stop the fire of the Ganon. The presence of the Calamity Guardians, the stalkers and turrets, within the walls introduces the lore of the occupied throne. These machines have nested in the royal halls, representing the total displacement of the human. This is the lore of the automated usurpation. It suggests that the defense system has become the ruling class. This represents the irony of the security. The very walls meant to keep the evil out are now the walls that keep the evil in. This highlights the mechanical claustrophobia of the end. To reach the sanctum, Link must deconstruct the Iron Guard, demonstrating that his sovereignty is built on the destruction of the false protectors. This turns the siege into a cleansing of the hearth, where the Knight of the Wild must unplug the apocalypse from the socket of the state, proving that power is a soul in the steel that has gone lethally wrong. The lore of the sanctum and the cocoon of the calamity provides the transition toward the final battle. At the center of the castle, hanging from the ceiling like a gestation of the nightmare, is the core of Ganon. The lore of the suspended malice is the lore of the century of the standoff. It suggests that Zelda has been burning her life force for 100 years to keep the Ganon larva from hatching into its true form. This represents the infinite endurance of the vow. Link realizes that the castle is not a fortress, but a life support machine for a divine struggle. This highlights the temporal pressure of the savior. Every second Link spends exploring is a second of Zelda's agony. This is the final psychological weight of the hero, where the Lord must shatter the shell of the purgatory, proving that true grace is the courage to end the weight. For the Link of the castle era, the world is the testing of the memory's reality. You realize that the world was beautiful and vain. The lore suggests that Link is the janitor of the divine. You are the only hand capable of sweeping the malice from the throne room. The castle is not a home. It is a reminder of the sin that you must face with your very sword. This perspective is what makes the siege of the sanctum so gothic. You are killing the ghosts to save the girl. You look at the glow of the malice, knowing that it is the only blood that the castle still pumps. The Golden Age is a shattered window, and you are the only light left to shine through the shards of the fall of the House of Hyrule. As this 8th segment of the history concludes, Link stands at the door of the sanctum, the Master Sword vibrating with a holy hatred. Behind him lies the ruins of the hall. Before him lies the Calamity Ganon and the voice of the princess. The air is no longer cold with the presence, but scalding with the malice. You have seen the rot in the gilded cage, the shame of the monarchy, and the regret of the king. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the siege of the center to the final confrontation. You realize that the princess is at her limit. You look at the cocoon in the center of the room, knowing that you will need the fury of the Four to break the egg of the end of the world. The Golden Age is a scream in the dark, and you are the only note left to finish the song. The descent into the sanctum and the hatching of the Calamity Ganon introduces the lore of the primal corruption of the Sheikah vision. This entity is not a man, nor a king, but a biomechanical abomination composed of ancient guardian parts and raw malice, representing the grotesque synthesis of the age. The lore suggests that Ganon, frustrated by his inability to reincarnate due to Zelda's seal, attempted to build a new body from the very technology meant to destroy him. For Link, this battle is the lore of the confrontation with the absolute error. Unlike the Blights, which were specialized phantoms, the Calamity is the total sum of the failure. This is the lore of the technological nightmare, where the laser eye of the Guardian and the scimitar of the desert are wielded by a spider of the void. It proves that the Calamity is a logic bomb that has consumed the geometry of the gods to create a temple of the flesh. The intervention of the divine beasts provides the lore of the artillery of the ancestors. As the battle begins, the 4 laser beams from the Titans strike the castle, representing the final synchronization of the dead. This is the lore of the vengeance of the Four. It suggests that the champions have waited a century to fire the final shot. This represents the symmetry of the tactical redemption. The lore of the beam strike is the lore of the piercing of the veil. It reduces the life force of the Calamity by half, proving that the hero is the finishing stroke of a century-long strategy. This highlights the interconnected nature of the sovereignty. Link is not fighting a solo duel. He is the physical tip of the spear for a multi-species coalition, turning the boss fight into a judgment of the unified tribes, where the grief of the provinces is concentrated into a single point of light. The Battle of the Sanctum introduces the lore of the echoes of the Blights. As the fight progresses, the Calamity shifts between the fighting styles of the elemental phantoms, representing the total memory of the murderer. This is the lore of the Archive of the Kill. It suggests that Ganon has absorbed the techniques he used to execute Mipha, Derek, Revali, and Urbosa. This represents the psychological horror of the duel. To fight Ganon is to relive the trauma of the champions. This highlights the adaptive malice of the core. The entity uses the shield of the Gorons and the teleportation of the Rito, proving that the darkness is a mime of the light. Link's victory in the chamber is the lore of the deconstruction of the machine, where the Master Sword acts as the surgical tool of the spirit, carving the malice away from the stolen iron until the core of the evil is exposed to the light of the sun. The ascension of the dark beast Ganon provides the lore of the incarnation of the pure hatred. When the mechanical body is destroyed, Ganon gives up on reincarnation and releases his internal essence upon the Hyrule field. This is the lore of the formless terror. He becomes a mountain of malice shaped like a boar of the void, representing the total abandonment of reason. The lore suggests that this is the ultimate state of the Demon King, where thought is replaced by instinct. This represents the final de-evolution of the enemy. Ganon is no longer a villain with a goal. He is a natural disaster with a face. This highlights the primal nature of the conflict. The war for Hyrule has turned into a struggle against the void, proving that the Demon King is a cosmic rot that must be cauterized by the fire of the heavens before the world can heal its own skin. The lore of the Bow of Light and the voice of the princess introduces the lore of the final weapon of the bloodline. As Link rides across the field, Zelda's voice grants him the Bow of the Stars, representing the manifestation of the Hylian prayer. This is the lore of the non-physical steel. It suggests that the bow is not an object, but a frequency of the spirit. This represents the holy resonance of the pair. Zelda is providing the light, and Link is providing the aim. This highlights the bicameral nature of the Hylian salvation. The princess and the knight are the two halves of the one truth. Link's use of the bow is the lore of the pinning of the shadow, where he must strike the cores of the malice to open the eye of the demon, proving that sovereignty is a coordination of the divine, where the wisdom identifies the weakness and the courage strikes the heart. The emergence of Princess Zelda provides the transition toward the final ceiling. When the eye of the boar is pierced, Zelda rematerializes from the body of the malice, representing the resurrection of the goddess flesh. The lore of the ceiling light is the lore of the end of the century-long breath. It suggests that Zelda has been waiting for the hero's hand to release the full power of the blood. This represents the exhaustion of the martyr. Zelda does not use a spell. She uses her will to command the darkness to cease. This highlights the absolute authority of the Hylia. The gold of the Triforce erupts from her palm, swallowing the boar and dissolving the malice back into the ether of the history. This is the final cleansing of the continent, where the princess finally reclaims the air, proving that true grace is the ability to say enough to the dark. For the Link of the final battle, the world is the testing of the purpose. You realize that the world is saved but silent. The lore suggests that Link is the anchor of the reality. You are the only weight that kept the princess from drifting into the infinite. The Ganon was not an enemy, he was a storm that you had to outlast to see the dawn. This perspective is what makes the fall of the dark beast so empty. You have killed the apocalypse to inherit a ruin. You look at the princess, knowing that her dress is the only flag that the kingdom still flies. The Golden Age is a breath of the relief, and you are the only lungs left to exhale the ghost of the calamity of the century. As this 9th segment of the history concludes, the shadow of the Ganon vanishes into the blue of the sky. Behind you lies the scars of the field. Before you stands the Princess Zelda, her eyes full of the 100 years. The air is no longer scalding with the malice, but quiet with the peace of the grave. You have seen the primal corruption, the artillery of the ancestors, and the incarnation of the hatred. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the final confrontation to the reconstruction of the identity. You realize that the legend is over, but the life is just beginning. You look at the Master Sword in your hand, knowing that its glow has faded into the sleep. The Golden Age is a question in the wind, and you are the only voice left to answer the princess. The stillness of the Hyrule field after the dissipation of the malice introduces the lore of the post-calamity silence. This is the moment where the sound of the world changes from the beeping of the guardian to the rustle of the grass, representing the ceasefire of the soul. The lore suggests that the land itself had to forget how to scream before it could remember how to breathe. For Link and Zelda, this silence is the lore of the weight of the sudden peace. Unlike the adrenaline of the battle, the aftermath is a vacuum of purpose, where the heroes must face the reality of the dead. This is the lore of the geographic mourning, where every hill they look upon is a mass grave of the culture they failed to protect. It proves that the restoration is not a celebration, but a funeral for the century, where the victory is simply the permission to grieve without the threat of the sword. The recovery of the final memory, the 13th memory, provides the emotional anchor for the princess's awakening. This lore is defined by the awakening of the mortal goddess. It reveals that Zelda's power did not come from ritual or prayer, but from the desperation to save the person she loved. This is the lore of the human catalyst of the divine. It suggests that the Triforce is not a tool of the worthy, but a response to the pure heart. This represents the shattering of the royal expectation. Zelda's power manifested only when she stopped trying to be a princess and started being a human. This highlights the existential paradox of the bloodline. The very pressure placed on her by the king was the wall that kept the light in the dark. This turns the calamity into a cruel rite of passage, where the goddess was born from the ash of the girl's heart, proving that true grace is an act of love that trumps the logic of the altar. The lore of the silent princess flower introduces the botanical symbol of the Hylian survival. This rare bloom, once nearly extinct, is found thriving across the ruins of the castle. The lore suggests that the flower represents the princess herself, beautiful and fragile, yet impossible to kill. This is the lore of the vegetative persistence. It suggests that the wild was gardening the hope of the kingdom while the people were in hiding. This represents the sympathy of the nature. The flower refuses to grow in a garden and only thrives in the wild, mimicking the spirit of the new era. This highlights the organic sovereignty of the post-war world. The Golden Age is no longer a marble palace. It is a field of wildflowers that grows over the iron of the tanks, proving that life is a force of subtraction that removes the metal to return the green. The departure of the spirits provides the lore of the final release of the anchor. As the sun sets on the first day of peace, the ghosts of King Rome and the 4 champions appear on the spires of the castle, representing the dissolution of the duty. This is the lore of the completion of the century. It suggests that the dead were only tethered to the earth by their failure. This represents the forgiveness of the ancestors. By defeating Ganon, Link has given the ghosts their graves. This highlights the spiritual retirement of the kingdom. The king is no longer a king, and the knight is no longer a knight. They are simply spirits who have finished the work. This turns the castle spires into a gateway to the ether, where the old world finally closes its eyes, leaving the new world in the hands of the 2 who remember. The lore of the repaired Master Sword introduces the concept of the Silent Sentry. With the malice gone, the blade returns to a state of dormancy, representing the relief of the steel. This is the lore of the peace of the weapon. It suggests that the sword has earned its rest just as much as the hero. This represents the mutual retirement of the pair. Link discovers that the Master Sword is now heavier, carrying the weight of the souls it has cut. This highlights the burden of the veteran. The blade is no longer a tool of destiny, but a relic of the trauma. This is the final metamorphosis of the divine tool, where the master of the blade becomes the historian of the scars, proving that true peace is the ability to put the sword away and leave it in the forest for a history that will never need it again. The meeting at the spring and the final words of the legend provides the transition toward the reconstruction. Zelda looks at the world and asks Link, "Do you really remember me?" This is the lore of the fragility of the connection. It suggests that the memory is the only thing left of the kingdom. This represents the identity of the survivors. Link and Zelda are the only 2 people who know what was lost. This highlights the loneliness of the restoration. They are not leaders of a people. They are children of a dead world who must teach the wild how to speak the name of Hyrule. This is the final emotional closing of the wild era, where the quest becomes a conversation, proving that true grace is the shared silence between 2 people who have seen the end of the world and decided to stay. For the Link of the post-calamity era, the world is the testing of the memory's weight. You realize that the world is yours to build. The lore suggests that Link is the memory bearer of the land. You are the only document that the history has left. The Zelda was not a mission, she was a home that you had to find through 1,000 years of the forest. This perspective is what makes the end of the journey so quiet. You are done with the killing and ready for the living. You look at the princess, knowing that her tears are the only water that the kingdom still needs. The Golden Age is a breath of the fresh air, and you are the only heart left to pulse for the future of the Kingdom of the Wild. As this 10th segment of the history concludes, Link and Zelda walk toward the horizon of the new century. Behind them lies the grave of the Calamity. Before them stands a Hyrule that is empty and infinite. The air is no longer quiet with the peace of the grave, but loud with the song of the birds. You have seen the post-calamity silence, the awakening of the mortal goddess, and the departure of the spirits. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the reconstruction of the identity to the building of the future. You realize that the legend is dead, but the people are waiting. You look at the princess beside you, knowing that your hand is the only throne she still requires. The Golden Age is a step into the grass, and you are the only hero left to walk into the day. The initiation of the Champion's Ballad and the return to the Great Plateau introduces the lore of the recalibration of the hero's essence. This trial is not a physical conquest, but a spiritual audit conducted by the ancient Sheikah monks, representing the refining of the legend. The lore suggests that the one-hit obliterator, a weapon that drains the user's life to a single point, is a tool of absolute vulnerability. It proves that the master of the wild must be capable of surviving on instinct and precision alone, without the safety net of the goddess's hearts. For Link, this trial is the lore of the humility of the blade. It strips away the armor of the century and forces him to face the bokoblin and the bat as if he were a mortal man. This is the lore of the existential balance, where the power to kill in one strike is balanced by the fragility to die in one touch, proving that true sovereignty is the mastery of the moment. The discovery of the 4 new shrines across the plateau provides the lore of the submerged trials of the spirit. These are not mere training grounds, but mechanical purgatories designed to test the hero's creative logic. This is the lore of the final exam of the Sheikah. It suggests that the monks of the past were not satisfied with Link's victory over the calamity. They required a proof of the intellect that matches the strength of the arm. This represents the intellectual purity of the hero. Each shrine is a puzzle of the soul, utilizing the runes of the slate in ways that defy the physics of the surface. This highlights the technocratic sanctity of the order. By completing these shrines, Link is validating the Sheikah vision, turning the Great Plateau into a launching pad of the ascended mind, proving that the hero of the wild is the final product of 10,000 years of sacred engineering. The journey to the 4 pillars of the champions introduces the lore of the postmortem communion. These pillars, appearing near the homes of the fallen heroes, represent the echoes of the living grief. The lore suggests that the spirits of the champions are still bound to their duty, even after the calamity's fall. This is the lore of the unfinished melody. By visiting the monuments of Maifa, Derek, Revali, and Urbosa, Link is singing their songs back to them. This represents the relational continuity of the priesthood. Link must complete trials of the environment that the champions themselves once faced, proving his empathy for their struggle. This highlights the symmetry of the legend. You are not just learning their powers. You are inhabiting their history, turning the quest for the ballad into a pilgrimage of the shared soul, where the knight becomes the vessel for the unfulfilled lives of his 4 closest friends. The second battle with the blights within the illusory realm provides the lore of the confrontation with the internal trauma. This is the lore of the memory prison. It suggests that the blights were not just Ganon's phantoms, but specific fears that each champion could not overcome. This represents the catharsis of the survivor. Link must fight the blights with limited equipment, mimicking the disadvantage the champions felt in their final moments. This highlights the vicarial justice of the hero. By winning these fights, Link is rewriting the ending of the story for his friends. This is the final healing of the champion's dignity, where the grief of the domain and the shame of the mountain are transmuted into the light of the spirit, proving that true grace is the ability to face the past's defeat and strike the killing blow on behalf of those who can no longer hold the sword. The final trial beneath the Shrine of Resurrection introduces the lore of the heart of the divine beast. This is a secret 5th titan, a massive engine of the divine, buried beneath the very spot where Link slept for a century. This is the lore of the laboratory of the creation. It suggests that the Shrine of Resurrection was only the control room for a much larger sovereignty of the gear. This represents the mechanical genesis of the hero. Inside the engine, the 4 elements, water, fire, wind, and electricity are unified into a single logic. This highlights the total integration of the wild. To solve the trial, Link must synchronize the gears of the world, demonstrating that his sovereignty is the mastery of the mechanism. This turns the final dungeon into a birth canal of the modern god, proving that the master of the slate is the key that unlocks the infinity of the Sheikah technology. The battle with Monk Maz Koshia provides the lore of the final witness of the goddess. This is not a fight against evil, but a holy duel of the worthy. The monk, who has sat in stasis for 10 millennia, stands from his throne to test the hero's absolute limit. This is the lore of the living dead of the faith. It suggests that the Sheikah were so dedicated to the hero that they delayed their own death to provide him with a true mirror. This represents the ultimate recognition of the sovereignty. Maz Koshia uses the arts of the ninja, the clones of the shadow, and the gigantism of the ancient magic, proving that the hero must be better than the monks who created him. This turns the trial into a sacrament of the blade, where the teacher falls to the student, proving that true grace is the student outgrowing the master to claim the future. The acquisition of the Master Cycle 0 introduces the lore of the mechanical steed of the hero. This is the divine beast of the fifth champion, Link himself. This is the lore of the internal combustion of the legend. It suggests that the hero's titan is not a giant animal, but a tool of the horizon. This represents the total mobility of the soul. The cycle runs on the debris of the world, turning the trash of the calamity into the fuel of the restoration. This highlights the resourceful nature of the wild era. The glow of the ancient engine is the new heartbeat of Hyrule, proving that the knight is now the master of the speed. Link's ride across the fields on the cycle is the lore of the victory lap of the immortal, where the pony of the past is replaced by the lightning of the future. For the Link of the Champion's ballad, the world is the testing of the memory's resolution. You realize that the world is yours to explore at speed. The lore suggests that Link is the fifth titan of the land. You are the only machine that has a soul. The Maz Koshia was not an enemy. He was a grandfather who had to see you strong before he could turn to dust. This perspective is what makes the final photo so painful. You look at the picture of the 5 champions, knowing that you are the only body left in the frame. The Golden Age is a snapshot in the pocket, and you are the only hand left to hold the ghost of the smile. As this 11th segment of the history concludes, Link stands atop the Great Plateau, the Master Cycle 0 idling beneath him. Behind him lies the trials of the monks. Before him stands the Hyrule that he has finally earned. The air is no longer tense with the trial, but open with the freedom of the road. You have seen the recalibration of the essence, the final witness of the monk, and the birth of the fifth titan. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the building of the future to the infinite horizon. You realize that the adventure is never over as long as there is gas in the tank. You look at the photo of your friends, knowing that their memory is the map you will follow. The Golden Age is a roar of the engine, and you are the only rider left to chase the sunset. The lore of the ancient Sheikah culture and the history of the first calamity introduces the narrative of the zenith of the digital god. 10,000 years before the current era, Hyrule was not a kingdom of swords, but a technocratic utopia where the Sheikah tribe had automated the divine protection. The lore suggests that the 4 divine beasts and the Guardian army were created to remove the human element from the war against Ganon. This is the lore of the algorithmic salvation. It proves that the ancient ancestors sought to turn the prophecy of the hero into a predictable calculation. For the current Link, this history is the lore of the mechanical hubris. It reveals that the kingdom's greatest strength was also its structural flaw. This is the lore of the Iron Paradox, where the shield of the people was built with the same logic that Ganon would eventually hack and invert, proving that true sovereignty cannot be outsourced to the machine. The discovery of the ancient tapestry provides the lore of the visual record of the Primal War. This artifact, kept by Impa, depicts a red-haired hero and a princess of light standing alongside the mechanical titans. This is the lore of the first absolute victory. It suggests that the first battle was a one-sided slaughter, where the technology worked perfectly. This represents the false security of the crown. The lore of the tapestry is the lore of the blueprint of the trap. It highlights how the success of the past became the manual for the future's doom. Because the first war was so efficient, the kingdom stopped training the heart and started manufacturing the weapon. This highlights the intellectual stagnation of the Hylian blood. The kingdom became a customer of the Sheikah rather than a partner of the goddess, turning the royal authority into a bureaucracy of the maintenance, proving that power without struggle leads to the decay of the spirit. The lore of the ban on technology introduces the concept of the regression of the fear. After the first Ganon was defeated, the king of that era became terrified of the Sheikah power. This is the lore of the sovereignty of the insecure. He ordered the guardians to be buried and the monks to be exiled, representing the castration of the progress. This represents the betrayal of the intellectual caste. The lore suggests that the Sheikah were too advanced for the throne. This highlights the paranoia of the monarchy. By burying the machines, the king did not delete the danger. He simply hid the knowledge. This is the dark root of the current calamity. When King Rome dug up the machines a century ago, he was touching a poison that his ancestors had left in the soil. This turns the ancient progress into a buried sin, proving that knowledge without wisdom is a time bomb of the history. The encounter with ancient Sheikah relics in the wild introduces the lore of the cultural purgatory. The Sheikah who refused to bury their technology became the Yiga clan, while those who complied became simple villagers. This is the lore of the split of the eye. It suggests that the Sheikah soul was broken by the crown's ingratitude. This represents the radicalization of the forgotten. The Yiga lore is the lore of the vengeance of the engineer. They serve Ganon because Ganon is the only force that values their invention. This highlights the tragedy of the technical genius. The Sheikah slate in Link's hand is a stolen piece of a dead dream. This turns the exploration of the map into a reclamation of the intellectual dignity, where the hero is the only user left for a system that was betrayed by its own king. The lore of the constellations and the star patterns of the shrines provides the lore of the cosmic alignment of the Sheikah. The lore suggests that the 120 shrines were not placed randomly, but are mirrors of the sky. This is the lore of the astrology of the machine. It suggests that the Sheikah science was tuned to the vibration of the universe. This represents the universal ambition of the tribe. They did not just want to save Hyrule. They wanted to measure the breath of the goddess. This highlights the spiritual mathematics of the wild. Each spirit orb is a calculated fragment of the divine. This is the final metamorphosis of the religion, where the prayer is replaced by the activation key. It proves that the ancient era was a digital enlightenment that was extinguished by the shadow of the throne, leaving the modern world to stumble in the dark of its own primitive fears. The presence of the tech labs, Hat Eno and Akala, provides the transition toward the modern recovery. Robbie and Pura are the last embers of the ancient flame, representing the biological persistence of the science. The lore of the ancient furnaces is the lore of the manual labor of the high-tech. It suggests that the modern Sheikah must carry the fire because they have lost the internal spark. This represents the humility of the descendant. They are children playing with the toys of giants. This highlights the technological amnesia of the land. Link's use of the ancient arrows is the lore of the weaponized memory, where he deletes the enemy using a light from a 10,000-year-old sundae. This is the final tactical irony of the wild, where the oldest power is the only new solution to the eternal problem of the Calamity Ganon. For the Link of the ancient lore, the world is the testing of the lineage. You realize that the world was once a grid. The lore suggests that Link is the system administrator of the ruin. You are the only hand with the permissions to reboot the world. The Sheikah slate is not a gadget. It is a deed of the ancient civilization that you must sign with your very actions. This perspective is what makes the discovery of the history so tragic. You are using the tools of the people who were thrown away. You look at the glow of the blue energy, knowing that it is the only blood that the machines still understand. The Golden Age is a battery that is dying, and you are the only charger left to keep the light burning. As this 12th segment of the history concludes, Link stands before the tech lab, the ancient core glowing in his pack. Behind him lies the buried history of the machines. Before him stands the Hyrule that is both old and new. The air is no longer mysterious with the fog, but cold with the logic of the eye. You have seen the zenith of the digital god, the betrayal of the Sheikah, and the ban on the technology. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the mastery of the horizon to the restoration of the science. You realize that the future is hidden in the past. You look at the Guardian in the distance, knowing that you will need its parts to build the shield of the new kingdom. The Golden Age is a circuit in the sand, and you are the only current left to close the loop. The exploration of the Akala Highlands and the approach to the Akala Citadel introduces the lore of the last bastion of the Hylian will. This region is defined by its autumn-colored trees and the towering stone fortress that dominates the skyline, representing the final defiance of the military state. The lore suggests that when central Hyrule fell, the remaining soldiers retreated here to make a final stand against the machine. For Link, this region is the lore of the geography of the desperation. Unlike the scattered ruins of the fields, Akala is a wound of history, where the density of the conflict is still visible in the scorched earth. This is the lore of the military apocalypse, where the hero must witness the graveyard of the regiment. It proves that the calamity was not just a magical strike, but a sustained siege that systematically dismantled the soldier class of the king. The arrival at the Akala Citadel provides the lore of the blood-stained citadel. Once considered the unconquerable Eye of the North, the fortress was where the Hylian army was finally annihilated by the Guardians. This is the lore of the failure of the stone. It suggests that the traditional warfare of Hyrule was obsolete against the digital precision of the Sheikah weapons. This represents the technological slaughter of the brave. The lore of the citadel is the lore of the vertical grave. Because the fortress was built on a high peak, the soldiers were trapped by their own high ground. This highlights the strategic irony of the fall. The very defensive design that protected them for centuries became a killing box once the machines climbed the walls. This turns the citadel into a monument of the futility, where the valor of the knight was erased by the efficiency of the laser. The encounter with the Akala Ancient Tech Lab and Robbie introduces the lore of the eccentricity of the survivor. Robbie, the lead researcher of the Guardians, represents the guilt of the engineer. His lore is defined by the penance of the creator. He lives in a converted lighthouse at the edge of the world, modified by the gear. This is the lore of the biological machine. Robbie has integrated the Sheikah tech into his own life to stay alive long enough to see the hero return. This represents the obsession of the scientific remnant. His lab is a fortress of the blueprint, where he uses the ancient oven, Cherry, to forge the weapons of the past. This highlights the manual resurrection of the power. By feeding Guardian parts into the furnace, Link is recycling the apocalypse to build the resistance, turning the scavenged scrap into the arrows of the divine vengeance. The lore of the ancient arrows provides the tactical solution to the mechanical plague. These arrows, tipped with Sheikah energy shards, are the lore of the erasure of the material. It suggests that the ancient power does not just damage the enemy, it deletes it from the physical plane. This is the lore of the digital exorcism. It represents the only equality in the wild. With an ancient arrow, the peasant can kill the titan. This highlights the democratization of the destruction. Link's use of these arrows is the lore of the slaying of the artificial life, where he must shatter the eyes of the machines that once slaughtered his comrades. This is the final tactical reconciliation of Akala, where the knight uses the science of the Sheikah to avenge the blood of the fortress, proving that sovereignty is the ability to turn the enemy's teeth against its own throat. The discovery of the Tarre town site introduces the lore of the construction of the new social contract. This is a quest that begins in Akala, representing the rebirth of the multi-species civilization. The lore suggests that Hyrule is no longer a bloodline, but a community of the displaced. This is the lore of the architecture of the integration. By bringing together the Goron, Gerudo, Rito, and Zora to build a town from the stumps of the forest, Link is drafting the new constitution. This represents the horizontal sovereignty of the post-war era. It proves that the old kingdom had to die for the new unity to be born. This highlights the optimistic nature of the Akkala frontier. While the Citadel is a death trap of the past, Tarrey Town is a lifeboat for the future, proving that true grace is the ability to build a home in the shadow of the ruin. The presence of the Lomii Labyrinth Island provides the transition toward the ancient secrets. This floating maze in the Akkala Sea represents the architectural puzzles of the divine. The lore of the Lomii tribe is the lore of the mystery of the vanished designers. It suggests that the ancient Sheikah were not the only architects of the land. This represents the scale of the historical depth. The labyrinth is a trial of the perseverance, protecting the travel medallion and the ancient armor. This highlights the geographic reward of the wild. To master the maze is to claim the sovereignty of the sea. This turns the Akkala coastline into a gateway to the unknown, where the hero must navigate the geometry of the gods to recover the tools of the travel, proving that the master of the wild is the only one who can solve the riddles of the earth. For the Link of the Akkala era, the world is the testing of the strategic resolve. You realize that the world was soldiered and lost. The lore suggests that Link is the general of the aftermath. You are the only commander left to review the troops of the grave. The Citadel is not a fort, it is a scar on the sky that you must cleanse with your very presence. This perspective is what makes the climb of the Citadel so heavy. You are walking on the bones of the army you were meant to lead. You look at the rusted guardians, knowing that they are the executioners who finished the kingdom. The Golden Age is a broken banner in the mud, and you are the only pole left to raise the flag of the restoration. As this 13th segment of the history concludes, Link stands atop the Akkala Tech Lab, the blue flame lighting the coast. Behind him lies the graveyard of the Citadel. Before him lies the spring of power and the voice of the goddess. The air is no longer tense with the defeat, but bright with the possibility of the build. You have seen the bastion of the will, the guilt of the Robbie, and the rebirth of the Tarrey town. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the restoration of the science to the consecration of the power. You realize that the power is not in the stone, but in the people. You look at the ancient arrow in your hand, knowing that you will need its light to pierce the heart of the final darkness. The Golden Age is a hammer on the nail, and you are the only hand left to build the new Hyrule. The journey to the springs of power, wisdom, and courage introduces the lore of the trilateral consecration of the soul. These sacred sites, hidden in the deepest reaches of the Akkala, Lanayru, and Farron regions, represent the physical echoes of the goddess Hylia. The lore suggests that while the Triforce is no longer a physical object held in a castle, its essence is bound to the very waters of the land. For Link, visiting these springs is the lore of the pilgrimage of the divine frequency. Unlike the mechanical shrines of the Sheikah, the springs are natural cathedrals, where the magic is organic and ancient. This is the lore of the spiritual geography, where the hero must offer a scale of the dragon to open the gateway to the heavens. It proves that the calamity was unable to pollute the source of the goddess's grace, even if it succeeded in dethroning her family. The arrival at the Spring of Power in Akkala provides the lore of the strength of the eternal flame. Located in a hollowed-out caldera, this spring is dedicated to the Din aspect of the divinity. This is the lore of the purity of the fire. It suggests that power is not the force of the sword, but the will to endure the heat. This represents the resilience of the Hylian spirit. The lore of the Spring of Power is the lore of the forging of the body. Zelda came here to beg for the strength to hold back Ganon, only to be met with silence. This highlights the cruelty of the divine timing. The spring did not fail her. It was waiting for the hero to complete the triad of the return. This turns the spring into a reliquary of the frustration, where the knight must succeed where the princess wept, proving that sovereignty is a flame that only ignites when the courage and wisdom are already present in the blood. The trek to the Spring of Wisdom atop Mount Lanayru introduces the lore of the Frost of the Forbidden Knowledge. This spring is guarded by the dragon Nadra, who has been infected by the malice. This is the lore of the corruption of the purity. It suggests that even the messengers of the gods are vulnerable to the Ganon. This represents the tragedy of the intellectual high ground. Zelda's failure at this spring was the final breaking point before the calamity. The lore of the Nadra battle is the lore of the exorcism of the sky. Link must chase the dragon through the freezing peaks to shoot the eyes of the malice, representing the purification of the wisdom. By freeing the dragon, Link is cleansing the mind of the land. This highlights the clarity of the restoration. The wisdom is not a book. It is the freedom from the infection, proving that the master of the wild is the physician of the divine. The discovery of the Spring of Courage in the Faron jungle introduces the lore of the ferocity of the hidden growth. Hidden behind the face of the stone dragon, this spring is dedicated to the far-or aspect. This is the lore of the vitality of the green. It suggests that courage is the ability to grow in the dark. This represents the primal immunity of the jungle. The lore of the Spring of Courage is the lore of the pulse of the life force. It is the most obscured of the springs, proving that the heart of the hero is the secret foundation of the world. This highlights the instinctive sovereignty of the knight. While Zelda sought wisdom and the king sought power, Link inhabits the courage. This turns the Faron jungle into a womb of the spirit, where the hero is recognized by the earth, proving that true grace is a root that refuses to be pulled by the shadow of the demon. The lore of the three dragons, Dinral, Nadra, and Farash, provides the lore of the atmospheric guardians of the cycle. These are not monsters to be slain, but spirits to be revered. The lore suggests that the dragons are the nerves of the goddess, moving the elements through the sky. This is the lore of the eternal transit. They represent the indifference of the divine. They do not help Link. They simply exist. This highlights the scale of the Hylian reality. The war for the castle is small compared to the flight of the dragon. By collecting the scales, Link is harmonizing with the universe. This turns the dragon hunt into a sacrament of the nature, where the hero becomes a part of the weather, proving that the lordship is not about ruling the people, but about respecting the rhythm of the stars. The presence of the goddess statues across the world provides the transition toward the internalization of the power. These statues, found in every village and temple, act as the communication nodes of the Hylia. The lore of the statues is the lore of the decentralized faith. It suggests that the goddess is everywhere and nowhere. This represents the democratic nature of the prayer. You do not need a priest, you only need a spirit orb. This highlights the meritocratic sanctity of the wild. The goddess does not give strength. She exchanges it for labor. This is the final metamorphosis of the religion, where the worship is proved by the action. It proves that the world of the wild is a gymnasium of the soul, where the hero grows divine by lifting the weight of the world's problems. For the Link of the Spring's era, the world is the testing of the divine alignment. You realize that the world is watched by eyes of light. The lore suggests that Link is the conductor of the threefold force. You are the only bridge between the power, the wisdom, and the courage. The springs are not pools. They are mirrors of your own potential that you must look into without blinking. This perspective is what makes the pilgrimage of the Hylia so ancient. You are talking to the silence of a goddess who left. You look at the glow of the water, knowing that it is the only blood that the earth still offers. The Golden Age is a reflection on the surface, and you are the only face left to disturb the water of the history. As this 14th segment of the history concludes, Link stands at the Spring of Courage, the scale of Farash glowing in his hand. Behind him lies the trials of the three elements. Before him lies the Master Sword and the final path to the castle. The air is no longer mysterious with the jungle, but electric with the consecration. You have seen the trilateral consecration, the exorcism of the Nadra, and the vitality of the green. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the consecration of the power to the ultimate readiness. You realize that the goddess is smiling in the wind. You look at the Triforce on your hand, knowing that you are finally aligned with the destiny. The Golden Age is a song of the water, and you are the only note left to resonate with the sky. The journey into the Faron Woods and the discovery of the ancient Zonai ruins introduces the lore of the prehistoric shadow of the jungle. This region is defined by its humid density and the megalithic stone carvings of dragons, owls, and boars, representing the primitive sovereignty of the first tribes. The lore suggests that the Zonai were a warlike tribe who vanished long before the Hylian kingdom reached its peak. For Link, this territory is the lore of the geographic amnesia. Unlike the structured logic of the Sheikah, the Zonai ruins are instinctive and brutal, carved by a people who worshipped the raw power of the elements. This is the lore of the barbaric divine, where the architecture is not meant to help the hero, but to awe him. It proves that the Calamity is merely the latest layer of a history that has been violent and wild for tens of thousands of years. The arrival at the Thunder Plateau provides the lore of the permanent storm of the goddess. This area is locked in a perpetual lightning strike, representing the electrical barrier of the ancestors. The lore suggests that the plateau was a testing ground for those who sought to master the far-or aspect of the world. This is the lore of the kinetic trial. It suggests that the weather is a lock and the hero is the key. This represents the climactic immunity of the worthy. The lore of the Thunder Plateau is the lore of the grounding of the ego. Link must navigate a field of conductive death, proving that his sovereignty is built on the calculation of the strike. This highlights the atmospheric tension of Faron. By solving the riddle of the orbs, Link is silencing the sky, proving that the Master of the Wild is the only one who can order the storm to cease, turning a death trap into a pedestal of the spirit. The encounter with the Zonai ruins of Floria introduces the lore of the lost language of the stone. These ruins are scattered along the river, representing the drowning of the ancient culture. Their lore is defined by the aesthetic of the might. The Zonai did not build cities. They built labyrinths and altars. This is the lore of the Predator's philosophy. It suggests that the ancient world was not a utopia, but a jungle of the strong. This represents the evolutionary purgatory of Hyrule. The lore of the Zonai is the lore of the Vanishing Act. They left behind barbaric armor that increases the attack power, proving that their grace was found in the kill. This highlights the primal ancestry of the knight. Link's use of the Zonai gear is the lore of the regression of the hero, where he must inhabit the savagery to survive the calamity, proving that true grace is a beast that hides in the heart of the saint. The lore of the Floria Bridge and the Great Waterfall provides the lore of the liquid veins of the goddess. This bridge is the longest in the kingdom, representing the engineering of the connection. The lore suggests that the water of Floria is the purest blood of the earth. This is the lore of the hydrological sovereignty. It suggests that the jungle is the lungs of the continent. This represents the abundance of the unseen. While the castle was the head, the Faron Woods are the body of the life force. This highlights the sustaining nature of the wild. Link's journey across the bridge is the lore of the crossing of the vitality, where he must look down into the depths to see the reflection of the dragon Farosh, proving that the Master of the Wild is the guardian of the flow, turning the jungle trek into a sacrament of the hydration, where the spirit is washed clean by the spray of the fall. The presence of the Lurlin village provides the transition toward the coastal peace. This tropical fishing village represents the leisure of the apocalypse. The lore of the Lurlin people is the lore of the indifference to the legend. They live far from the castle and the divine beasts, proving that the calamity was a distancy rumor to those who live by the sea. This represents the escapism of the fringe. They do not worship the hero, they worship the tide. This highlights the alternative sovereignty of the coast. Link's arrival in Lurelin is the lore of the vacation of the Savior, where he can trade the sword for the fishing harpoon, demonstrating that true grace is the ability to be simple in a world of complex sorrows. This turns the Faron coastline into a sanctuary of the mundane, where the hero is just a traveler with a good appetite, proving that the kingdom is not just a political entity, but a collection of quiet moments. The mystery of Eventide Island introduces the lore of the ultimate stripping of the self. This isolated island in the Necluda Sea is a shrine quest that removes all of Link's gear, representing the reset of the mortal logic. The lore of Eventide is the lore of the naked truth of the hero. It suggests that the gods wanted to know if Link was strong, or if he was just well-armed. This represents the foundational sovereignty of the individual. On Eventide, Link must reinvent the fire and the club, proving that his sovereignty is portable and internal. This highlights the resourceful nature of the Faron Sea. To conquer the island is to prove the worth of the man, turning the Necluda Sea into a refiner's fire, where the master of the wild is forged back into a survivor of the first day, proving that power is an idea that does not need a scabbard. For the Link of the Faron era, the world is the testing of the primal instinct. You realize that the world is older than the king. The lore suggests that Link is the ancient predator of the goddess. You are the only animal capable of navigating the stone dragons. The Zonai ruins are not rubbish. They are gears of a lost heart that you must restart with your very blood. This perspective is what makes the trek through the jungle so heavy. You are walking in the footprints of a tribe that forgot how to speak. You look at the stone owls, knowing that they are the watchers who saw the first Ganon. The Golden Age is a vine on the statue, and you are the only machete left to cut the path to the truth. As this 15th segment of the history concludes, Link stands on the shores of Lurelin, the Zonai sword hanging at his hip. Behind him lies the thick shadow of the jungle. Before him lies the Necluda Sea and the endless blue. The air is no longer heavy with the humidity, but fresh with the salt of the tide. You have seen the prehistoric shadow, the permanent storm, and the leisure of the apocalypse. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the trial of the desert to the peace of the fringe. You realize that the kingdom is huge and unknowable. You look at the Eventide Island on the horizon, knowing that you are finally ready to be nothing. The Golden Age is a wave on the sand, and you are the only shell left to echo the song of the sea. The exploration of the Hylian stables and the traveling routes introduces the lore of the nomad sovereignty of the commoner. This is the narrative of the people who were not knights, scholars, or royalty, but the resilient backbone that refused to break when the castle fell. The lore suggests that the stable association became the new central nervous system of the kingdom. For Link, these hubs are the lore of the social restoration. Unlike the silent ruins of the plateau, the stables are sanctuaries of the mundane, where the smell of hay and the sound of the lute replace the echoes of war. This is the lore of the informal kingdom, where the high law of the king has been replaced by the code of the road. It proves that the calamity could destroy the political architecture, but it could not erase the Hylian impulse to gather, turning the stable into a temporary capital of the spirit. The arrival at a stable provides the lore of the architecture of the tent. These structures, topped with massive wooden horse heads, are designed to be portable and impermanent, representing the psychology of the refugee. This is the lore of the transient security. It suggests that the people of Hyrule have learned that stone is a trap. This represents the adaptability of the displaced. The lore of the stable is the lore of the shared fire. Link must sit among the merchants and laborers, proving that his sovereignty is built on listening to the people. This highlights the democratic warmth of the wild. The stables are neutral grounds, where the Hylian, Goron, and Rito trade as equals. This turns the stable network into a safety net of the civilization, where the kingdom survives in the pockets of the common man, proving that true grace is a hot meal shared with a stranger on a rainy night. The encounter with the beetle and the traveling merchants introduces the lore of the resilient economy of the ruin. Beetle, the tireless peddler, represents the persistence of the trade. His lore is defined by the burden of the rucksack. He carries the materials of the survival across the most dangerous paths in the land. This is the lore of the heroism of the ordinary. It suggests that buying and selling is an act of defiance against the entropy of the Ganon. This represents the economic heartbeat of the land. The lore of the merchant is the lore of the circulation of the hope. Link's use of the rupee is the lore of the validation of the value, where the hero supports the merchant to sustain the social fabric. This highlights the transactional grace of the wild, where the restoration is funded by the scavenging of the earth, proving that power is a currency that must flow to stay alive. The lore of the horse god Malenia provides the spiritual weight of the Hylian companion. Hidden in the Faron region, this deity represents the divinity of the animal bond. The lore suggests that the horse is not a vehicle, but a soul-bound partner. This is the lore of the resurrection of the loyalty. Malenia can bring back horses that have died in battle, proving that the gods value the service of the beast as much as the service of the hero. This represents the sacred contract of the road. The lore of the horse god is the lore of the responsibility of the rider. It warns Link that his sovereignty over nature is not absolute, but earned through kindness. This turns the equine bond into a sacrament of the journey, where the knight and the steed are one single unit of the resistance, proving that true grace is a gentle hand on the mane of the fearless. The presence of the Malenia spring provides the transition toward the consequences of the wild. This site represents the moral compass of the wilderness. The lore of the spring is the lore of the accountability of the power. It suggests that the wild is watching how Link treats his subordinates. This represents the ethics of the mastery. You cannot save the world if you mistreat the life that helps you. This highlights the empathetic nature of the restoration. Link's journey to the spring is the lore of the apology to the nature, where he must pay the price to restore the bond. This turns the Faron Highlands into a courtroom of the spirit, where the master of the wild is judged by the quality of his mercy, proving that the kingdom is not just a political entity, but a harmony of the species. The resilience of the Hylian commoners in the face of the blood moon introduces the lore of the infinite patience of the mortal. Every time the moon turns red, the monsters return, representing the cyclical trauma of the people. The lore of the blood moon is the lore of the Sisyphus of the frontier. It suggests that the commoner must win the war every day. This represents the quiet sovereignty of the farmer and the smith. They do not have master swords, yet they stay in their homes. This highlights the defiant nature of the Hylian life. Link's role is the lore of the Shield of the Night, where he must kill the nightmare so the people can sleep. This turns the Hyrule night into a vigil of the protection, where the hero is the only lamp in a world that wants to be dark, proving that power is a duty to the vulnerable. For the Link of the stable era, the world is the testing of the social connection. You realize that the world is lived in. The lore suggests that Link is the protector of the mundane. You are the only reason the beetle can walk the road. The stables are not checkpoints. They are beacons of the humanity that you must keep lit with your very presence. This perspective is what makes the gathering at the fire so poignant. You are talking to the people who don't know you are the legend. You look at the cooking pot, knowing that it is the only altar that the people still recognize. The Golden Age is a lute song in the dark, and you are the only ear left to value the music of the common man. As the 16th segment of the history concludes, Link leaves the Dual Peak stable, his horse galloping toward the next horizon. Behind him lies the warmth of the fire. Before him lies the wild that is still full of danger. The air is no longer tense with the legend, but bright with the reality of the life. You have seen the nomad sovereignty, the heroism of the beetle, and the resurrection of the loyalty. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the consecration of the power to the service of the people. You realize that the kingdom is not the castle, but the road. You look at the horse beneath you, knowing that you are finally a part of the land. The Golden Age is a gallop in the wind, and you are the only rider left to carry the peace to the next gate. The discovery of the 120 ancient shrines across the continent introduces the lore of the subterranean sovereignty of the Sheikah monks. These structures, glowing with a bioluminescent blue light, represent the educational purgatory of the hero. The lore suggests that the monks did not build these trials for worship, but for the scientific perfection of the Savior. For Link, the shrines are the lore of the geometric isolation. Each entrance is a digital baptism, where the world of the wild is exchanged for a world of pure logic and lethal machinery. This is the lore of the technocratic ritual, where the hero must prove that his mind is as sharp as his blade. It proves that the calamity was seen by the ancient monks as a problem to be solved through the iteration of the soul, turning the geography of Hyrule into a grid of the divine testing. The arrival at a combat trial shrine provides the lore of the echoes of the Guardian War. Inside these chambers, Link must face Guardian Scouts, representing the microcosm of the apocalypse. This is the lore of the controlled violence. It suggests that the monks preserved the enemy to ensure the hero would never forget the rhythm of the laser. This represents the strategic muscle memory of the legend. The lore of the Guardian Scout is the lore of the mirror of the failure. Link must defeat the very machines that killed him a century ago, but in a sacred environment where the failure is a lesson rather than an end. This highlights the redemptive nature of the Sheikah trials. By shattering the Scout, Link is reclaiming his dominance over the iron of the Ganon, proving that true sovereignty is the mastery of the machine that once mastered you. The completion of the puzzle shrines introduces the lore of the manipulation of the universal laws. These trials focus on the runes of the Sheikah slate, magnesis, stasis, cryones, and bombs, representing the scientific dominion over the matter. The lore suggests that the hero must be a master of the physics before he can be a master of the people. This is the lore of the rational divinity. It suggests that miracles are simply unapplied equations. This represents the intellectual sovereignty of the slate. The lore of the puzzle is the lore of the alignment of the will. Link must stop time and move the unmovable, proving that his sovereignty is built on the understanding of the hidden gears. This highlights the technological grace of the wild. The shrines are laboratories of the god mind, turning the hero into an engineer of the miracle, proving that power is a logic that does not depend on the sword. The lore of the spirit orbs provides the spiritual currency of the internal growth. These glowing spheres, held in the hands of the mummified monks, are the lore of the crystallized wisdom of the ancestors. It suggests that the monks have dissolved their own lives to create packets of power for the hero. This is the lore of the sacrifice of the scholar. This represents the biological exchange of the faith. The lore of the spirit orb is the lore of the heart of the monk. Link must trade these calculations at the statues of Hylia to increase his stamina and health, proving that his sovereignty is a gift of the dead. This turns the shrine completion into a sacrament of the inheritance, where the knight consumes the life force of the past to fuel the resistance of the present, proving that true grace is a battery that requires the labor of the 120. The lore of the three labyrinths, north, south, and east, provides the lore of the geometric barriers of the Lomii. These massive stone mazes represent the architectural silence of the forgotten tribes. The lore suggests that the Lomii were the master builders of the seclusion. This is the lore of the sovereignty of the hidden. To navigate the labyrinths is to prove the persistence of the searcher. This represents the navigation of the void. The lore of the labyrinth is the lore of the trap of the ego. Link must lose himself to find the armor of the ancients, proving that his sovereignty is built on humility in the face of the scale. This turns the edges of the kingdom into a border control of the spirit, where the hero must earn the right to the gear by walking the path of the confusion, proving that the master of the wild is the only one who can exit the maze of the history. The acquisition of the gift of the wild armor introduces the lore of the restoration of the hero's identity. Upon completing all 120 shrines, the monks grant Link the traditional green tunic, representing the visual return of the legend. This is the lore of the thread of the continuity. It suggests that the Wild Era Link has finally earned the skin of the heroes of the past. This represents the historical validation of the soul. The lore of the tunic of the wild is the lore of the completion of the vessel. You are no longer the knight in the blue shirt. You are the green hero of the prophecy. This highlights the iconic sovereignty of the restoration. The monks have woven the history into a physical garment, turning the hero into a living tapestry, proving that true grace is a uniform that binds the current knight to the eternal champion of the goddess. For the Link of the Shrine era, the world is the testing of the internal calibration. You realize that the world is a clock that has stopped. The lore suggests that Link is the winder of the universal spring. You are the only hand with the strength to turn the key of the 120. The shrines are not temples. They are batteries of the hope that you must drain with your very focus. This perspective is what makes the light of the shrine so cold. You are talking to the ghosts of men who died to give you a puzzle. You look at the spirit orb, knowing that it is the only soul that the history has left to give. The golden age is a glow in the dark, and you are the only lamp left to carry the light to the castle. As the 17th segment of the history concludes, Link stands atop the Temple of Time, his tunic of the wild catching the wind. Behind him lies the trials of the 120 monks. Before him stands the Hyrule that he has finally mastered. The air is no longer mysterious with the shrines, but bright with the perfection of the hero. You have seen the subterranean sovereignty, the logic of the runes, and the gift of the wild. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the service of the people to the ultimate transcendence. You realize that the hero is complete. You look at the Master Sword in your hand, knowing that it is finally balanced by the spirit. The Golden Age is a click of the gear, and you are the only key left to unlock the final door of the Ganon. The industrial lore of the ancient Sheikah technology and the terror of the Guardian Stalkers introduces the narrative of the mechanical predation of the kingdom. This technology, unearthed from the soil of Hyrule, represents the technocratic hubris of the ancestors. The lore suggests that the Guardians were built to be the shield of the light, but their optical logic was susceptible to the viral malice of Ganon. For Link, these machines are the lore of the relentless pursuit. Unlike the organic monsters of the wild, the Guardian Stalker is a precision instrument of death that does not tire or feel fear. This is the lore of the automated genocide, where the sound of the piano riff and the red targeting laser represent the final seconds of the Hylian life. It proves that the Calamity is a technological betrayal that turned the kingdom's own safety net into its executioner. The encounter with a Guardian Stalker in the open field provides the lore of the kinetic terror of the eye. These multi-legged tanks are the apex predators of the ruin, representing the mobility of the infection. The lore suggests that the ancient core within the machine is an artificial soul that has been rewritten by the hatred. This is the lore of the possessed metal. Link must learn the lore of the perfect parry, where the Master Sword or a pot lid acts as a mirror of the divine justice. This represents the symmetry of the reflection. By deflecting the beam back into the eye of the machine, Link is returning the sin to the sinner. This highlights the poetic justice of the wild. The Guardian is defeated not by force, but by its own overwhelming power, proving that true sovereignty is the ability to turn the enemy's strength into its own grave. The exploration of the Akala Sea and the Lomii Labyrinth Island introduces the lore of the oceanic isolation of the ancient secrets. This coast is defined by its vertical cliffs and the infinite blue, representing the boundaries of the divine knowledge. The lore suggests that the Sheikah and the Lomii used the sea as a moat of the spirit. This is the lore of the hydrological seclusion. For Link, the sea is the lore of the endurance of the horizon. He must use the ancient raft and the Cryones rune to navigate the salt and the gale, proving that his sovereignty is amphibious. This highlights the vastness of the pre-Calamity reach. The ancient tech is not just land-based. It is a global network that extends to the edges of the map, proving that the kingdom was once a maritime superpower of the spirit that sought to map the very tides of the goddess. The discovery of the ancient orbs and the pedestals of the sea provides the lore of the energy grids of the coast. These glowing spheres, found in the ruins along the Akala shore, represent the wireless power of the Sheikah. The lore suggests that the whole continent was once plugged into the earth. This is the lore of the battery of the continent. Link must carry the orb through the gauntlet of the Guardians, representing the restoration of the flow. This highlights the labor of the conductor. By placing the orb, Link is rebooting the local logic, turning the Akala coastline into a spark of the ancient consciousness. This proves that the Master of the Wild is the only electrician left in a world that has blown its fuses, turning the coastal exploration into a sacrament of the reconnection, where the spirit is transmitted through the copper and the stone. The lore of the Akala Sea's rusted guardians provides the lore of the coastal massacre. Beneath the waves and along the beaches lie hundreds of guardian husks, representing the naval failure of the resistance. The lore suggests that the machines attempted to cross the water to hunt down the refugees on the islands. This is the lore of the infinite reach of the malice. It represents the claustrophobia of the archipelago. Even the deep water was not deep enough to hide from the eye of the Ganon. This highlights the desperation of the Hylian flight. Link's scavenging of these drowned husks is the lore of the grave robbing of the apocalypse, where he must extract the screws and gears from the iron corpses to build his own armor, proving that true grace is the ability to profit from the defeat and fashion a shield from the metal of the massacre. The presence of the Techlab furnaces along the Akala paths introduces the lore of the blue flame of the progress. These stone lanterns, stretching from the deep woods to the high lab, act as the veins of the scientific hope. The lore of the blue flame is the lore of the fragility of the Enlightenment. Link must carry the torch through the rain and the wind, representing the protection of the knowledge. This represents the human element of the technology. The machine cannot start itself. It requires the breath of the hero. This highlights the symbiotic nature of the Sheikah science. The ancient tech is a sleeping giant that can only be awakened by the flame of the vow. This turns the Akala trek into a vigil of the fire, where the night is the keeper of the light, proving that the future is a flicker that must be shielded by the hand. For the Link of the Akala Sea era, the world is the testing of the technical endurance. You realize that the world is mechanical and cold. The lore suggests that Link is the user of the divine OS. You are the only input that the system still recognizes. The Guardian is not a monster. It is a broken tool that you must decommission with your very blade. This perspective is what makes the scavenging of the coast so industrial. You are talking to the iron of a tribe that turned itself into a weapon. You look at the ancient core, knowing that it is the only heart that the machines still offer. The Golden Age is a flash of the blue light, and you are the only circuit left to connect the past to the victory. As this 18th segment of the history concludes, Link stands at the Akala Sea cliff, the ancient shield glowing on his arm. Behind him lies the graveyard of the Stalkers. Before him lies the deep blue and the secrets of the Lomii. The air is no longer tense with the laser, but bright with the possibility of the power. You have seen the mechanical predation, the mirror of the reflection, and the vigil of the flame. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the restoration of the science to the ultimate readiness. You realize that the science is ready to be used. You look at the ancient arrow in your hand, knowing that you are finally armed with the truth. The Golden Age is a hum of the engine, and you are the only pilot left to steer the kingdom to the dawn. The search for the captured memories across the ruined landscape introduces the lore of the archaeology of the forgotten self. This quest is not about saving the world, but about recovering the ghost of the man who existed before the Shrine of Resurrection. The lore suggests that Link's amnesia is a biological shield that protected his mind from the trauma of the fall, yet it left him as a blank slate in a world that remembers him as a legend. For Link, these 12 locations are the lore of the geographic trigger. He must stand in the exact footprints of his past to force his brain to resynchronize with the history. This is the lore of the fractured identity, where the hero is a stranger to his own hands. It proves that the Calamity did not just kill the kingdom. It murdered the continuity of the hero, turning the quest for the princess into a search for the mirror. The discovery of the memory at the Sacred Ground ruins provides the lore of the ceremony of the insecurity. In this memory, Link is knighted by Zelda in front of the other champions, representing the official coronation of the burden. The lore suggests that the Master Sword was a weight that neither Link nor Zelda felt worthy to carry. This is the lore of the silent resentment. It represents the friction of the destiny. The lore of the Sacred Ground is the lore of the performance of the duty. While the king watched with pride, Zelda watched with envy, seeing Link's success with the blade as a critique of her failure with the power. This highlights the interpersonal tragedy of the legend. The hero was not a brother-in-arms to the princess, but a living reminder of her shortcomings, proving that sovereignty is a wall that was built between two lonely children by the expectations of the bloodline. The memory at Lake Colomo introduces the lore of the voyeurism of the night. In this moment, Zelda is seen exploring the ancient Sheikah technology, representing the intellectual rebellion of the princess. Her lore is defined by the escape into the logic. She preferred the gears of the guardian to the prayers of the spring, seeking a human solution to a divine problem. This is the lore of the secular goddess. It suggests that Zelda was the first scientist of the ruin. This represents the technological foresight of the failure. The lore of Lake Colomo is the lore of the unwanted shadow. Link's presence in the background, silent and watchful, represents the claustrophobia of the protection. Zelda's frustration at being followed by the sword proves that the hero was initially seen as a jailer of the tradition, turning the wild exploration into a cold war of the duty, where the knight had to protect a girl who hated his silence. The lore of the final memory at Fort Hat-Eno provides the structural climax of the fall of the knight. This is the lore of the limit of the mortal steel. On this battlefield, surrounded by hundreds of destroyed guardians, Link finally broke. This is the lore of the exhaustion of the vow. It suggests that the hero is not infinite. This represents the humanity of the shield. The lore of Fort Hat-Eno is the lore of the transition of the power. It was only when Link collapsed that Zelda's power awakened, proving that the knight had to fall so the goddess could rise. This highlights the symbiotic sacrifice of the pair. Link died to give Zelda the seconds she needed to save the world. This turns the Fort Hat-Eno wall into a sacrament of the last stand, where the blood of the hero became the ink of the new prophecy, proving that true grace is the courage to fail so that someone else can win. The presence of the painter Pikango provides the transition toward the reconstruction of the vision. This traveling artist represents the memory of the eye. The lore of Pikango is the lore of the preservation of the beauty. He paints the ruins not as sores, but as landscapes, proving that the art can heal the trauma of the site. This represents the cultural persistence of the Hylian. He helps Link find the locations in the photographs, acting as the guide of the subconscious. This highlights the collaborative nature of the recovery. Link cannot remember alone. He needs the perspective of the commoner to contextualize his own life. This turns the search for the memories into a dialogue with the land, where the hero uses the canvas of the painter to fill the holes in his own heart, proving that the kingdom is a shared image that must be repainted by the survivors. The lore of the Master Sword's voice introduces the lore of the sentience of the steel. In the memories, Zelda is often seen talking to the sword, representing the telepathic continuity of the Hylia. The lore suggests that the sword has a will that only the princess can hear. This is the lore of the feminine frequency of the blade. It suggests that the Master Sword is a relay station for the goddess. This represents the spiritual technology of the legend. The sword told Zelda that Link would return, proving that the destiny was managed from the inside of the metal. This highlights the predictive grace of the wild. The blade was not waiting for a knight. It was curating a resurrection. This turns the Master Sword into a living document, where the steel acts as the guardian of the hero's identity, proving that power is a conversation that never stops, even in the sleep of the century. For the Link of the memory era, the world is the testing of the internal archive. You realize that the world is full of you. The lore suggests that Link is the ghost of his own greatness. You are the only person who isn't there when the memory plays. The photographs are not pictures. They are windows into a man you no longer are. This perspective is what makes the flash of the past so disturbing. You are watching yourself from the outside. You look at the princess in the image, knowing that she is the only person who knows the name of your silence. The golden age is a blurred edge of a photo, and you are the only focus left to develop the truth of the night. As this 19th segment of the history concludes, Link stands at the sacred ground ruins, the Master Sword glowing with the light of the past. Behind him lies the 12 captured images. Before him stands the final confrontation and the reality of the living Zelda. The air is no longer mysterious with the amnesia, but heavy with the responsibility of the remembered. You have seen the archaeology of the self, the ceremony of the insecurity, and the limit of the steel. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the restoration of the identity to the execution of the vow. You realize that the man you were is gone, but the knight you are is ready. You look at the castle in the distance, knowing that you are finally whole. The Golden Age is a clear vision, and you are the only eye left to watch the dawn of the victory. The exploration of the Hylian ruins scattered across the central plain and the Great Plateau introduces the lore of the architecture of the decapitated state. These skeletal remains of outposts, gateways, and garrison houses represent the structural mutilation of the kingdom. The lore suggests that the Hylian civilization was one of connectivity, built on the premise that the king's law could reach any corner via stone roads and bridges. For Link, these ruins are the lore of the geographic skeleton. He must navigate the ribcage of the empire, where the absence of roofs and the presence of encroaching ivy represent the victory of the wild over the stone. This is the lore of the domestic horror, where the hearths are cold and the gateposts of the history now serve as perches for the scavenger. It proves that the Calamity was a force of deconstruction that targeted the logic of the Hylian order. The arrival at the Temple of Time ruins provides the lore of the secularization of the sacred. Once the holiest site in the land, it is now a roofless shell where the statue of the goddess sits in the rain. This is the lore of the abandonment of the divine protection. It suggests that the gods did not intervene to save their own house. This represents the theological crisis of the fall. The lore of the Temple of Time is the lore of the descent of the religion. Because the walls are gone, the sacred has been diluted into the mundane. This highlights the equalizing nature of the ruin. The bird's nest where the priests once prayed, proving that the divinity has moved from the stone altar to the open sky. This turns the temple into a reliquary of the silence, where the hero must speak to the goddess in the wind, proving that sovereignty is a prayer that no longer requires a roof to reach the heavens. The encounter with the ruins of the Hyrule garrison introduces the lore of the erasure of the military presence. These massive barracks near the castle represent the sudden silence of the sword. Their lore is defined by the instantaneous defeat. There are no trench lines or siege works, only ash and iron. This is the lore of the surprise of the machine. It suggests that the Hylian army was deleted before it could deploy. This represents the strategic paralysis of the kingdom. The lore of the garrison is the lore of the rusted standard. Link finds soldiers' claymores buried in the dirt, proving that the bravery was overwhelmed by the velocity. This highlights the industrial cruelty of the Ganon. The guardians did not fight the soldiers, they harvested them. This turns the central plain into a factory of the ghost, where the knight must walk through the gears of the failure, proving that true grace is the courage to stand when the world is being unmade. The lore of the Lon Lon ranch ruins, provides the emotional weight of the lost domesticity. This circular arena, once the heart of the Hylian pastoral life, is now a crater of the memory. This is the lore of the mutilation of the childhood. It suggests that the Calamity did not just target the fort, but the home. This represents the totalitarian reach of the hatred. The lore of the ranch is the lore of the broken wheel. The wagons are rotted and the fences are gone, proving that the peace was the first casualty of the war. This highlights the vulnerability of the pastoral soul. Link's discovery of the milk crates and the broken harnesses is the lore of the artifacts of the innocent, where the hero realizes that the kingdom was not just kings and dragons, but cows and songs, proving that the master of the wild is the avenger of the small things. The presence of the Dea village ruins in the Farron wetlands introduces the lore of the drowning of the history. This village, submerged in the marshes, represents the sinking of the social record. The lore of Dea is the lore of the rot of the narrative. It suggests that the calamity was followed by a natural reclamation that swallowed the evidence. This represents the amnesia of the landscape. Link must wade through the water of the regret to find the chests of the past, representing the deep diving of the spirit. This highlights the swampy sovereignty of the aftermath. The world is hiding its scars under the lily pad and the moss. This turns the wetlands into a liquid library, where the hero must salvage the truth from the muck of the century, proving that the kingdom is a submerged vow that refuses to be dissolved by the time or the tide. The lore of the Colosseum ruins introduces the lore of the spectacle of the corrupted glory. This massive arena, now infested with linnal and elemental monsters, represents the inversion of the Hylian excellence. The lore suggests that the Colosseum was once a stage for the knightly arts. This is the lore of the arena of the shame. It represents the bestial usurpation of the culture. Ganon has turned the symbol of the sport into a den of the murder. This highlights the mocking nature of the malice. The monsters are watching the hero from the stands, proving that the world has become a theater of the execution. This turns the Colosseum into a sacrament of the defiance, where the knight must perform the victory for an audience of the damned, proving that power is a performance that must be reclaimed from the claws of the beast. For the Link of the Ruin era, the world is the testing of the perspective. You realize that the world is stone that can bleed. The lore suggests that Link is the architect of the reconstruction. You are the only eye that can see the building within the pile of the rocks. The ruins are not dead. They are waiting to be named by the survivor. This perspective is what makes the exploration of the walls so gothic. You are reading the cracks in the history of your own failure. You look at the broken archway, knowing that it is the only door that the past has left open. The Golden Age is a shadow on the floor, and you are the only sunlight left to illuminate the truth of the fallen. As this 20th segment of the history concludes, Link stands atop the Hyrule Castle gateway, the Hylian shield catching the light. Behind him lies the skeleton of the kingdom. Before him stands the Calamity Ganon and the heart of the infection. The air is no longer mysterious with the ivy, but electric with the end of the weight. You have seen the decapitated state, the failure of the stone, and the inversion of the glory. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the architecture of the collapse to the final demolition of the evil. You realize that the stone is gone, but the will is harder than the rock. You look at the castle in the distance, knowing that you are finally the only king of the rubble. The Golden Age is a new foundation, and you are the only mason left to build the new day. The study of the ancient Sheikah monks and their relationship with the celestial prophecy introduces the lore of the astronomical sovereignty of the preordained. These mummified sages, sitting in stasis for 10 millennia, represent the stagnation of the divine patience. The lore suggests that the Sheikah did not just predict the return of the hero, they engineered the environment to ensure it. For Link, the monks are the lore of the biological sacrifice. They have reduced their physical existence to dry skin and spirit to act as the living anchors for the shrines. This is the lore of the bureaucracy of the divine, where the goddess's will is managed by a committee of the dead. It proves that the calamity was an expected variable in a 10,000-year calculation, turning the geography of Hyrule into a calculated circuitry of the prophecy. The arrival at a Sheikah observatory or a star-themed shrine provides the lore of the astrology of the machine. Inside these chambers, the monks have mapped the constellations of the goddess, representing the mathematical basis of the religion. This is the lore of the cosmic alignment. It suggests that the Sheikah science was tuned to the vibration of the universe. This represents the universal ambition of the tribe. The lore of the stars is the lore of the navigational light. Link must use the orbs to replicate the positions of the planets, proving that his sovereignty is built on harmony with the cosmos. This highlights the technocratic sanctity of the wild. The monks believed that fate was not a mystery, but a geometry that can be solved, proving that power is a frequency that can be controlled by the master of the slate. The completion of the prophecy of the hero introduces the lore of the determinism of the bloodline. The monks often speak of the true hero who will wield the soul of the goddess, representing the mechanical requirement of the savior. The lore suggests that the hero is a key designed to fit into the lock of the shrines. This is the lore of the biological interface. It suggests that courage is a genetic frequency. This represents the eugenics of the legend. The lore of the prophecy is the lore of the loss of the free will. Link is not choosing to save Hyrule. He is executing a program written by the monks before his ancestors were born. This highlights the tragedy of the destiny. The hero is the final product of the Sheikah lab, proving that true grace is a protocol that must be followed to the end of the world. The lore of the star fragments provides the physical evidence of the celestial interaction. These glowing shards that fall from the night sky are the lore of the debris of the heavens. It suggests that the stars are physical batteries that the Sheikah used to power their greatest inventions. This is the lore of the harvesting of the infinite. This represents the material divinity of the land. The lore of the star fragment is the lore of the fallen spark. Link must chase the light before the sun rises, proving that his sovereignty is a race against the time. This turns the Hyrule night into a sacrament of the pursuit, where the night consumes the light of the stars to upgrade the gear of the man, proving that true grace is a rare material that must be caught while it is still burning. The lore of the three springs and the dragons provides the lore of the atmospheric guardians of the calibration. The monks and the dragons, Farosh, Nadra, Dinral, represent the triangulation of the world's energy. The lore suggests that the monks were the students of the dragons. This is the lore of the bestial wisdom. To understand the prophecy is to understand the weather. This represents the meteorological sovereignty of the ancients. The lore of the dragon is the lore of the indifferent observer. They do not help the hero. They test the hero's precision. This turns the sky of Hyrule into a testing ground of the aim, where the hero must strike the horn of the divine to extract the power, proving that the master of the wild is the only one who can harvest the spirit of the atmosphere. The acquisition of the monk's blessing introduces the lore of the validation of the vessel. Upon reaching the end of the 120 trials, the monks grant Link their final approval, representing the closing of the 10,000-year loop. This is the lore of the retirement of the Watchers. It suggests that the monks can finally dissolve into the light because their work is done. This represents the spiritual completion of the task. The lore of the blessing is the lore of the passing of the torch. You are no longer the student of the shrine. You are the master of the continent. This highlights the iconic sovereignty of the ascended hero. The monks have gifted the history to the night, turning the hero into a living archive, proving that true grace is a permission that ends the wait of the 10,000 years. For the Link of the prophecy era, the world is the testing of the cosmic design. You realize that the world is programmed. The lore suggests that Link is the operating system of the goddess. You are the only logic that can run the program of the victory. The monks are not people. They are instructions that you must read with your very actions. This perspective is what makes the light of the shrine so deterministic. You are talking to the code of a tribe that knew you would be here. You look at the star fragment, knowing that it is the only energy that the history has left to give. The Golden Age is a calculated result, and you are the only output left to validate the faith of the ancestors. As this 21st segment of the history concludes, Link stands atop the Great Plateau, the tunic of the wild glowing in the starlight. Behind him lies the trials of the 120 monks. Before him stands the final calamity and the reality of the prophecy's end. The air is no longer mysterious with the stars, but clear with the perfection of the design. You have seen the astronomical sovereignty, the logic of the celestial orbs, and the validation of the vessel. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the architecture of the collapse to the execution of the eternal plan. You realize that the hero is complete. You look at the Master Sword in your hand, knowing that it is finally balanced by the stars. The Golden Age is a final calculation, and you are the only solution left to end the equation of the Ganon. The exploration of the ancient battlefields scattered across the Central Plain and the Necluda region introduces the lore of the geographic scarring of the failed resistance. These locations, such as the Blatchery Plain and the Ash Swamp, represent the tactical despair of the Hylian infantry. The lore suggests that the transition from peace to slaughter was so rapid that the military had no time to establish trenches, resulting in open-field massacres. For Link, these battlefields are the lore of the topography of the Scream. He must walk over ground where the grass grew tall over the rust of the spears. This is the lore of the unfinished war, where the earth itself is stained by the iron and the malice. It proves that the calamity was a force of absolute erasure that targeted the living wall of the kingdom, turning the lush valleys of Hyrule into graveyards of the unbroken vow. The arrival at the Fort Hateno battlefield provides the lore of the last stand of the mortal shell. This massive stone fortification, now a choke point of the dead, is where the Guardian army was finally halted, representing the physical limit of the machine. The lore suggests that Link fought here until his body was a map of wounds. This is the lore of the divine exhaustion. It suggests that the Master Sword did not fail, but the human heart reached its capacity for pain. This represents the humanity of the legend. The lore of Fort Hateno is the lore of the martyrdom of the Protector. Link stood before the Sea of the Guardians to buy Zelda the Seconds of the Silence. This highlights the personal cost of the sovereignty. The fort is a cenotaph of the 100-year sleep, proving that true grace is the willingness to die in the dirt so that the future can take its first breath. The encounter with the rusted guardian husks in the Ash Swamp introduces the lore of the mechanical rigor mortis. These machines, frozen in the act of firing their lasers, represent the paralysis of the evil. Their lore is defined by the static terror. It suggests that when Zelda's power awakened, the malice was instantly cauterized, leaving the machines as hollow shells of the hate. This is the lore of the technological purgatory. It represents the sudden silence of the battlefield. The lore of the Guardian Husk is the lore of the Iron Corpse. Link can scavenge the gears, proving that the apocalypse has been demoted to spare parts. This highlights the resourceful nature of the survivor. The machines that once ruled the sky are now furniture of the swamp, turning the site of the massacre into a mine of the ancient material, proving that power is a battery that eventually runs dry. The lore of the memorial stones, found near various ruins, provides the emotional record of the common soldier. These simple stone markers, often overlooked in the grass, represent the anonymity of the sacrifice. This is the lore of the nameless valor. It suggests that for every champion with a divine beast, there were thousands of knights with only a soldier's shield. This represents the collective weight of the history. The lore of the memorial is the lore of the forgotten service. It lists the names of families that no longer exist, proving that the calamity was a biological deletion of the lineage. This highlights the grief of the landscape. Link's interaction with these stones is the lore of the commander's salute, where the hero acknowledges that the victory was paid for by the smallest hands, proving that the master of the wild is the executor of the general's will. The presence of the Colosseum and the gladiatorial malice introduces the lore of the desecration of the heroic ideal. This arena, now a circus of the monsters, represents the mockery of the knightly arts. The lore suggests that the Linnels and Moblins have occupied the stage to parody the Hylian excellence. This is the lore of the cultural inversion. It suggests that Ganon wanted to entertain the darkness with the blood of the hero. This represents the psychological siege of the past. To enter the Colosseum is to enter the stomach of the hate. This highlights the combative sovereignty of the arena. Link must kill the spectacle to reclaim the dignity of the sport. This turns the central ruins into a sacrament of the duel, where the knight must prove the superiority of the human spirit over the brutality of the beast, proving that the kingdom is a standard of the conduct that cannot be broken by the claw. The lore of the recovered Hylian shield within the castle lockup introduces the lore of the unbreakable identity. This shield is the only object that survived the century without rust or decay, representing the structural integrity of the legend. The lore suggests that the shield is a reflection of Link's resolve. This is the lore of the immutable protection. It suggests that true sovereignty is indestructible. This represents the absolute consistency of the hero. The lore of the Hylian shield is the lore of the return of the icon. When Link raises the shield, he is armoring his heart with the geometry of the first king. This highlights the ancestral sovereignty of the defense. The shield is not a tool. It is a vow of the steel, turning the hero into a walking fortress of the history, proving that true grace is the ability to take the hit and keep standing in the center of the storm. For the Link of the battlefield era, the world is the testing of the moral memory. You realize that the world is built on the brave. The lore suggests that Link is the survivor of the massacre. You are the only blade that didn't snap. The battlefields are not empty space. They are sacred geographies of the resistance that you must acknowledge with your very presence. This perspective is what makes the walk through the ash so solemn. You are talking to the silence of an army that died for you. You look at the rusted sword in the ground, knowing that it is the only greeting that your comrades have left to offer. The Golden Age is a bloodstain on the petal, and you are the only hand left to wash the history clean for the peace. As this 20-second segment of the history concludes, Link stands at the gate of the castle, the Hylian shield and Master Sword ready for the end. Behind him lies the scars of the Great War. Before him stands the Calamity Ganon and the source of the grief. The air is no longer mysterious with the rust, but burning with the vengeance of the fallen. You have seen the tactical despair, the last stand of the shell, and the inversion of the glory. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the architecture of the collapse to the final retribution. You realize that the war is finally over. You look at the castle in the distance, knowing that you are finally the only knight left to strike. The Golden Age is a final charge, and you are the only heart left to win the day for the dead. The astronomical phenomenon of the blood moon and the periodic crimson haze over the landscape introduces the lore of the respiratory cycle of the malice. This event is not a natural occurrence of the stars, but a metabolic pulse of the Ganon, representing the inability of the evil to stay dead. The lore suggests that while Link can destroy the flesh of the monsters, the essence of the hatred is woven into the very fabric of the Hyrulean reality. For Link, the rising of the red moon is the lore of the Sisyphus protocol. Every time he clears a path for the travelers, the moon resets the board, resurrecting the slain in a shower of purple embers. This is the lore of the infinite war, where the victory is always temporary and the enemy is eternal. It proves that the Calamity is a biological virus of the continent that uses the night sky as its relay station to broadcast the resurrection. The arrival of the Crimson Aura provides the lore of the atmospheric possession. As the clock strikes midnight, the air turns thick with malice dust, representing the choking of the natural law. This is the lore of the suspension of the grace. It suggests that for a single minute, the goddess Hylia loses her grip on the world, allowing the demon king to reanimate the slain. This represents the tidal nature of the power. The lore of the blood moon is the lore of the rebirth of the trauma. Link must watch as the bokoblin he just defeated rises from the ash, proving that his sovereignty is a constant labor. This highlights the existential fatigue of the hero. The moon is a clock of the despair, turning the Hyrule night into a sacrament of the persistence, where the knight must kill the same nightmare 1,000 times to keep the peace for a day. The encounter with the malice pools and the cursed skulls introduces the lore of the parasitic architecture of the Ganon. These pools of purple sludge, found within the castle and the divine beasts, represent the cancerous growth of the void. Their lore is defined by the sentience of the rot. It suggests that the malice is not liquid, but condensed grudge. This is the lore of the thinking poison. It represents the intrusive sovereignty of the demon. The lore of the malice pool is the lore of the mouth of the abyss. If Link touches it, his life force is consumed, proving that the darkness is hungry. This highlights the territorial nature of the infection. The Ganon is eating the stone of the castle to build a stomach for its hatred. This turns the infiltration of the sanctum into a surgery of the spirit, where the hero must excise the tumor to save the patient of the land, proving that true grace is the ability to touch the filth without becoming the infection. The lore of the Kilton and the monster shop provides the social record of the obsession with the evil. Kilton, the researcher of the night, represents the scientific fascination with the darkness. His lore is defined by the integration of the monster. He grinds the parts of the resurrected beasts to create Monpei, representing the economic exploitation of the curse. This is the lore of the scavenger of the night. It suggests that humanity has learned to live within the cycle rather than fighting it. This represents the adaptability of the morbid. The lore of Kilton is the lore of the mask of the beast. Link can wear the faces of the monsters to walk among them, proving that his sovereignty is flexible. This highlights the blurring of the identity. By becoming the monster to study the monster, Link is touching the void, proving that the master of the wild is the only man who can speak the language of the malice. The presence of the Calamity's eyes, the malice eyeballs, introduces the lore of the surveillance of the hatred. These organic orbs, protruding from the purple sludge, represent the constant gaze of the Ganon. The lore suggests that the Demon King is watching every step of the hero. This is the lore of the paranoia of the wild. It suggests that there is no privacy in the ruin. This represents the omnipresent sovereignty of the occupier. The lore of the eye is the lore of the weakness of the focus. When Link shoots the eye, the malice dissolves, proving that the darkness is fragile when it is looked at with the truth. This highlights the visual nature of the conflict. To blind the Ganon is to free the path, turning the castle exploration into a game of the sight, where the knight must extinguish the gaze of the evil to restore the privacy of the soul, proving that the kingdom is a sanctuary of the unseen. The lore of the eternal cycle of the Demon King provides the transition toward the finality of the ceiling. The lore suggests that Ganon is not a villain, but a law of the universe. This is the lore of the inevitable shadow. It suggests that light and dark are the two sides of the same coin. This represents the philosophical exhaustion of the legend. The calamity is a storm that must pass so it can return. This highlights the infinite duty of the bloodline. Zelda's role is to seal, and Link's role is to strike, but Ganon's role is to wait. This turns the final battle into a sacrament of the interval, where the hero is not winning a war, but buying a century of the silence, proving that power is a breath that must be held against the suffocation of the void. For the Link of the Blood Moon era, the world is the testing of the psychological stamina. You realize that the world is fighting to stay dark. The lore suggests that Link is the cleaner of the infinite. You are the only hand that doesn't get tired of sweeping the shadow. The Blood Moon is not an event. It is a challenge to your will that you must accept with your very soul. This perspective is what makes the resurrection of the enemy so grim. You are killing the same ghost of a history that won't go home. You look at the red sky, knowing that it is the only color that the calamity still paints. The Golden Age is a minute of the peace, and you are the only guardian left to defend the sunset from the blood. As this 23rd segment of the history concludes, Link stands atop the dueling peaks, the blood moon fading into the gray of the dawn. Behind him lies the resurrected horde. Before him stands the castle and the final seal. The air is no longer tense with the crimson, but cold with the reality of the loop. You have seen the respiratory cycle, the atmospheric possession, and the scavenger of the night. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the architecture of the collapse to the acceptance of the eternal. You realize that the fight is never over. You look at the Master Sword in your hand, knowing that it is finally hardened by the cycle. The Golden Age is a patient wait, and you are the only knight left to strike the moon out of the sky. The centennial imprisonment within the castle walls introduces the lore of the 100-year prayer of the Golden Goddess. This is the narrative of Zelda's internal siege, representing the absolute limit of the Hylian spirit. The lore suggests that for a century, Zelda was not merely waiting, but was locked in a state of active metaphysical combat, using her body as a living seal to keep the malice from overflowing the castle boundaries. For Link, hearing her voice throughout his journey is the lore of the telepathic tether. It proves that the princess was never a passive victim. She was the primary front line of the war. This is the lore of the singular vigil, where a lone girl held the weight of a continent's survival on the strength of a single unbroken thought. It turns the Hyrule castle into a reliquary of the vow, proving that the calamity was held back not by stone, but by the gravity of a woman's will. The arrival at the sanctum provides the lore of the dissolution of the mortal ego. Inside the heart of the castle, Zelda's physical form has become light and energy, representing the ascension of the bloodline. This is the lore of the sacrifice of the personality. It suggests that to save Hyrule, Zelda had to stop being Zelda and become the seal. This represents the tragedy of the divine burden. The lore of the 100-year prayer is the lore of the silent scream. While Link slept and forgot, Zelda watched and remembered every second of the kingdom's decay. This highlights the asymmetrical suffering of the pair. Link is the body that was healed, but Zelda is the soul that was scarred, turning the final confrontation into a sacrament of the release, where the knight arrives to relieve the sentry of a duty that has lasted a lifetime. The encounter with the voice of the princess introduces the lore of the guidance of the disembodied. Throughout the wild, Zelda's voice acts as the navigational beacon of the spirit, representing the sovereignty of the intuition. Her lore is defined by the omnipresence of the grace. She speaks when the blood moon rises and when Link enters a divine beast, proving that her sovereignty is amphibious, existing in both the physical and spiritual planes. This is the lore of the Invisible Queen. It suggests that sovereignty is not about sitting on a throne, but about occupying the atmosphere of the people. This highlights the protective nature of the wisdom. Zelda's voice is the last law of the land, turning the wild exploration into a dialogue with the divine, where the hero is coached by the light to end the Night of the Sword. The lore of the Diary of Zelda, found in her study, provides the intellectual record of the pre-calamity anxiety. This document is the lore of the imposter syndrome of the chosen. It reveals that Zelda felt like a failure because her power would not wake, representing the humanity of the goddess-born. This is the lore of the intellectual refuge. It suggests that her scientific obsession was a coping mechanism for her spiritual silence. This represents the vulnerability of the royal record. The lore of the diary is the lore of the loneliness of the altar. It proves that the legend was a terrified girl who just wanted her father's approval. This highlights the relational tragedy of the fall. The calamity was not just a war, it was a family crisis that ended the world, turning the ruined study into a shrine of the empathy, where the hero finally hears the heart of the woman he is destined to save. The presence of the king's ghost on the Great Plateau provides the transition toward the Zelda's redemption. The king's lore is the lore of the regret of the sovereign. He realizes that his pressure on Zelda was the wall that kept her power in the dark. This is the lore of the parental penance. It suggests that wisdom cannot be forced. It must be loved into existence. This represents the moral awakening of the monarchy. The king's disappearance into the light is the lore of the handoff of the fate. He leaves the princess in the knight's care, proving that the old world has admitted its fault. This turns the high spire into a pulpit of the forgiveness, where the ghost of the father gives the hero of the daughter the permission to succeed, proving that true grace is the ability to admit one was wrong before the end of the time. The lore of the silent Princess Bloom in the final scene introduces the lore of the botanical resurrection of the hope. When Zelda stands in the field and mentions the silent princess flower, it represents the survival of her own identity. The lore suggests that the flower, like Zelda, could not be cultivated and had to bloom in the wild. This is the lore of the organic sovereignty. It suggests that the wild was the only garden big enough for her soul. This represents the symmetry of the character and the land. The princess is no longer a captive of the castle. She is the queen of the grass. This highlights the healing nature of the restoration. The gold of the Triforce is now balanced by the green of the stem, turning the end of the journey into a sacrament of the rebirth, where the goddess is finally at home in the world of the mortal. For the Link of the final memory, the world is the testing of the emotional resolution. You realize that the world was saved by her tears. The lore suggests that Link is the witness of the Zelda's pain. You are the only eye that saw the cost of the 100 years. The castle is not a fort, it is a prison of the love that you had to break with your very soul. This perspective is what makes the meeting at the field so quiet. You are talking to a woman who has been alone for a century. You look at the princess, knowing that her smile is the only kingdom you ever wanted to rule. The Golden Age is a breath of the relief, and you are the only shoulder left to support the weight of the history. As this 24th segment of the history concludes, Link and Zelda stand in the field of Hyrule, the calamity a memory in the sky. Behind them lies the 100-year prayer. Before them stands the reconstruction of the civilization. The air is no longer tense with the battle, but fresh with the opportunity of the life. You have seen the internal siege, the ascension of the bloodline, and the botanical resurrection. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the execution of the vow to the beginning of the story. You realize that the legend is finished. You look at the princess beside you, knowing that you are finally free. The Golden Age is a step into the wild, and you are the only knight left to walk into the future with the goddess. The transition into the era of the restoration and the final walk toward the reconstruction of the kingdom introduces the lore of the post-legendary responsibility. This is the narrative of the mortality of the hero, where the divine duty ends and the civic duty begins. The lore suggests that the destruction of the calamity was so absolute that the old laws no longer apply, representing the clean slate of the Hylian identity. For Link and Zelda, the victory is not a throne, but a toolbox. This is the lore of the practical sovereignty, where the princess must learn to be a leader of the people, and the knight must learn to be a citizen of the world. It proves that the calamity was the end of the monarchy and the birth of the community, turning the map of Hyrule into a blueprint for the tomorrow. The departure from the sanctum and the walk through the Hyrule field provides the lore of the geographic forgiveness. As the malice fades, the land is seen as innocent for the first time in a century, representing the absolution of the soil. This is the lore of the botanical mercy. It suggests that the wild was not an enemy, but a caretaker of the spirit. This represents the harmony of the aftermath. The lore of the restoration is the lore of the manual labor of the grace. Link and Zelda must visit the villages and consult the elders, proving that their sovereignty is now relational rather than command-based. This highlights the humanizing nature of the piece. The goddess is now a neighbor, and the hero is now a friend, turning the kingdom into a shared garden of the survival. The encounter with the rebuilding of the towns introduces the lore of the architecture of the hope. From the Tare town model to the Hat-Eno expansion, the people are reclaiming the stone, representing the civic resurrection of the Hylian. Their lore is defined by the resilience of the commoner. It suggests that the kingdom was never the walls of the castle, but the fire in the hearth. This is the lore of the domestic sovereignty. It represents the end of the divine dependence. The lore of the future is the lore of the hand-built legacy. Link's role is the lore of the laborer of the goddess, where he uses his strength to clear the debris rather than slay the beast. This highlights the productive grace of the wild, where the Master Sword is sheathed so the hammer can be raised, proving that power is a building block. The lore of the legacy of the wild provides the historical record for the generations to come. The lore suggests that the wild era will be remembered as the age of the reconnection. This is the lore of the cultural bridge. It represents the unification of the species. The Goron, Zora, Rito, and Gerudo are no longer allies of the crown, but founders of the new world. This highlights the inclusivity of the restoration. The Triforce is now seen as a balance of the people rather than a weapon of the royal. This turns the history of the Calamity into a lesson of the unity, where the hero is the symbol of the cooperation. This is the final metamorphosis of the legend, where the individual disappears into the collective success, proving that true grace is the ability to be forgotten because the world no longer needs a savior. The presence of the Master Sword's return to the forest provides the transition toward the eternal sleep of the steel. Link returning the blade to the Korok forest represents the relinquishing of the violence. The lore of the pedestal is the lore of the piece of the metal. It suggests that the sword has earned its silence. This represents the retirement of the destiny. The lore of the forest is the lore of the sacred obscurity. The blade will wait for a future that may never come, proving that the hero is content with the mundane. This highlights the quiet sovereignty of the veteran. Link's walk away from the sword is the lore of the completion of the vow, where the knight becomes the gardener of the quiet, proving that the kingdom is a field that is finally safe to walk in without a shield. The final lore of the endless journey introduces the concept of the horizon of the heart. As Link and Zelda travel toward the Vah Ruta to investigate a malfunction, it represents the continuation of the curiosity. This is the lore of the scientific future. It suggests that peace is not stagnation, but new problems to solve. This represents the intellectual sovereignty of the pair. The journey never ends. It only changes its tone. This highlights the infinite nature of the wild era. The Golden Age is not a destination, but a way of traveling. This turns the conclusion of the story into a sacrament of the beginning, where the legend is replaced by the life, proving that power is a step taken by two people who refuse to stop walking. For the Link of the final part, the world is the testing of the reality. You realize that the world is small and beautiful. The lore suggests that Link is the author of the unwritten. You are the only hand with the ink of the future. The memories are not ghosts. They are teachers of the mistakes you won't repeat. This perspective is what makes the final look at the castle so neutral. You are done with the ruins. You look at the princess beside you, knowing that her presence is the only map you still need to follow. The Golden Age is a deep breath of the air, and you are the only heart left to pulse for the joy of the ordinary. As this 25th and final segment of the history concludes, Link and Zelda walk toward the Lanayru coast, the silent princess flower tucked in her hair. Behind them lies the 25-part struggle of the legend. Before them stands the infinity of the restoration. The air is no longer tense with the prophecy, but bright with the freedom of the choice. You have seen the post-legendary responsibility, the architecture of the hope, and the endless journey. The lore of Hyrule has shifted from the execution of the vow to the celebration of the life. You realize that the hero is gone, and the man is here. You look at the horizon, knowing that you are finally home. The Golden Age is a step into the light, and you are the only soul left to live the peace you have earned.